Good evening. Good evening.
Hey, how are you?
Okay, just under 60 seconds here.
Okay.
We always go on just a little bit extra, or I don't want to say late, but just another extra minute.
I like the background.
It's incomplete. We are live on all our platforms, FYI.
Okay. But it's audio only, right?
So one, you're gonna love the intro music. Hang on 1 second.
Sure.
So 601, what do you say? Here it is. We say we do this thing.
Do you want a man for president who's seasoned through and through, but not so doggone seasoned that he won't try something new? A man who's old enough to know. To you, it's up to you. It's strictly up to you. Do you want a man with spirit who is not afraid to fight? So that he will fight is right. A loyal man who brings a job a fresh new point of view. But it's up to you. It's up to you. It's strictly up to you. And do you deny to any man the right he's guaranteed to be elected president, no matter what his creed? It's to which we must be true. So it's up to you. It's up to you. It's strictly up to you. Do you like a man who answers straight, a man who's always fair, who measure him against the others and when you compare? You cast your vote for Kennedy and the change that's overdue. So it's up to you, it's up to you, it's up to you.
Welcome from my humble second bedroom here in the Saucon Valley, part of the Lehigh Valley in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, part of these United States, Western Hemisphere, North American continent on this planet Earth. The only one. We have Third Rock from the Sun in the Terran solar system, part of the Milky Way galaxy. This is the Kennedy Effect live with you for the 21st of January, 2024. And I say kind of the same thing almost every time that we start that, wow, where's the time going? And let's think about it. It was only 2 programs ago that was the 7th. It was our return program after the holidays and after COVID. And here we are in the back half of the month already. I think 2024 is going to be one of those years that just literally just disappears before our eyes. It's going to go exceptionally fast. We are thrilled to have you here from a very cold and snowy Lehigh Valley, where I actually worked from home most of the week watching the snow fall, which is kind of cool because they don't have a window at work. So it was nice to stare outside and watch the snow, but I'm done. It's good. We had 3 measurable snows that needed to be cleared and all of that fun stuff. And okay, I'm good. July, you are welcome to arrive anytime you wish. Let's get to the business end of the program, wherever you might be. Across the Facebook universe, we have shared the program to, I always forget to count. And yes, again, Facebook was kind enough to stop me dead cold in the middle of my sharing. So we made it out to 93 places before we got stopped. I think if I wait an hour, I can finish doing that. But it's annoying anyway, because look, we know what it is. They want me to give them lots of money that they don't have. So that's why I always say every week that you all, groups large and small, public and private, individuals, national, global pages, wherever you allow us to be, thank you, thank you, thank you. We could not do it without you. There is no hidden pile of money behind these curtains where we pay for advertising and pay for access and all that stuff. We do it on your kindness, and we couldn't do it without you, and we're very, very grateful. So we made it out to 93 places. Wherever you are on Facebook that you have shared our program and you can see it, you can stay right there, watch, and enjoy. However, as you all probably know by now, since we're in year 5, it is our home group Facebook page, That Other Side of Information, where I will see where, well, that's our home group Facebook page. My personal Facebook at Jeff Kennedy's, where I will see your comments, questions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We will open up the phone lines later in the program. We are also live right now on YouTube, also called That Other Side of Information. Cheat sheets right there, kids. Just blow it up and you'll see all of the fun, because I still have to look at it, see what social media we're actually on. I'm in that in-between sort of era where we still had copy paper or carbon paper and mimeographs all the way up to this fancy internet Google global machine thing that we do. We are live on all over Facebook and YouTube. And of course, hot101.net, our name is our web address. If you can connect to the internet anywhere on the planet and above it, you can listen to hot101.net 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Hot101.net is one of the cornerstones, founders, keystones, foundational blocks, fill in, insert proper term here, for internet global radio, and still is one of the leaders. And we have listeners literally around the globe. We're thrilled to have each and every one of you. Happy Monday to some of you around the globe as well. It isn't Sunday anymore, is it, for some of you? You're already at work. Part of the TCP Media Group as well. And of course, our loan sponsor, the PayGive app, paygive.org, a cash transaction app. We can also make purchases, buy gift cards and things. And when you do, you can designate a percentage of that money to the charity of your cause. The PayGive app, you have to pay for things when you buy them. Why not give while you do it? If I'm talking quickly, and it's because I'm excited. For 5 years, we've been doing this program. We've had some pretty stellar guests. We've had a lot of friends of the program who've donated a lot of their time to be here. As you know, I don't have any money, so I don't pay anybody to be here. They do it out of the kindness of their heart. We've had some big guests. We've had some friends and family. This is another show that I'm deeply honored by and excited by. Our guest is William Arnone. I have been telling you since we came back from the holidays, I laid out a theme for this program for 2024. And that theme is essentially, not really essentially, it is the theme of Bobby Kennedy's 1968 presidential campaign, which is, how can the so-called richest nation on earth allow its own citizens to starve, to not be employed, to not be housed, to not have heat, hot water, running water, sewage, jobs, any type of financial or health security. It was President Roosevelt, when he was trying to pass the second Bill of Rights, the Economic Bill of Rights, that said that men, okay, let's remember it was the 1930s and 40s, that men cannot truly be free when they are saddled with financial insecurity. Only financially secure people can be truly free. And I believe that Bobby Kennedy picked up that theme in his presidential campaign as well, as how can this overwhelmingly abundant and rich nation not be able to take care of all of its citizens? And then, of course, the added theme that we added to that for our program for this year is that the problems that we face in this country, the mirror that Bobby Kennedy was holding up to us during that campaign and asking us tough questions, it's only democracy that allows us to solve them. Fascism and dictatorship, corporatism don't allow us to fix these problems. Only democracy allows such a thing. And that's what we want to talk about tonight with one of the key, main, foundational contributors to the documentary that I have been strongly imploring you, encouraging you to watch, that remains on. It was part of our pre-show chat that Mr. Arnone and I, he mentioned that he was surprised that it was still on Netflix. Well, we're still watching it, and you should be watching it. It's only 5 whopping hours out of your life. I think you can spare it. Take one per week, even if you have to. We happened to binge it all, I think, in 1 or 2 nights when we were home with COVID here in the house. It's worth it. It's really worth it. You will learn things you did not know, which is what any documentary should do for you. But you will also get to hear from people like Mr. I'm pointing to a square, like he sees a like he's sitting next to me or something. I always do that. I don't know why I always do that. I'm pointing to a square. And you will get to hear firsthand accounts from folks who were there, like Mr. Arnone, and we are deeply, deeply honored to have him here on the program and to welcome you, sir. Welcome to the program.
Jeff, thank you very much for inviting me. I appreciate it deeply.
I want to open up with the very same question that we ask all of our first-time guests. It is intentionally vague because I want you to answer it however it comes to your head. Who is William Arnone, and how did you get here?
Well, my current role is Chief Executive Officer of a national nonprofit called the National Academy of Social Insurance. And you might say, what is that all about? It's a think tank that focuses on programs that I hope all your listeners are familiar with: Social Security, Medicare, unemployment insurance, workers' compensation. So my whole life's been devoted to public policy and how it is intertwined with politics in order to address fundamental issues such as the one that you mentioned, and that is economic insecurity that, based on a study we did, affects about 100 million Americans. About 1/3 of our population is experiencing what I would call a deep economic insecurity. And here it is, over 80 years since Franklin Roosevelt identified that as his overall theme. And we've had bits and pieces of progress here and there, sporadic, but when all is said and done, we've not addressed it in any meaningful way. So I got to this. A lot of my inspiration was working for Robert Kennedy. I was a sophomore at Fordham University in the Bronx, majoring in political science. He sent his staff up to talk to us, and they said, you can either study political science or do politics. If you want to do it, come to our office, volunteer, and we'll put you to work. And I said, you know what? It sounds good to me. So I attribute what I'm doing today to the inspiration of him as a person and his team in the New York Senate office back in the late 1960s.
One of the things that you mentioned in the documentary is that when you met the senator, I'm going to paraphrase badly. You correct me on anything that I goof up, because I'm sure as hell not perfect. And I do get things wrong. And I always encourage listeners, everybody, to, correct me if you think I'm wrong. Google it, DuckDuckGo, whatever you want to use. Correct me if you think I'm off on something. But I think it was the first time, or darn close to it, when you appear in the documentary, you mentioned that you met the senator and you were not terribly impressed. Tell us about that.
I met him. I went to a Jesuit high school in New York City, and I was going out to the school. I used to take the subway from the Bronx to Manhattan, and I'm with a friend of mine, a lifelong friend, turns out, and we're walking up the stairs. And it was 1964, and there at the top of the stairs is Robert Kennedy. He has just begun campaigning for the U.S. Senate from the state of New York. And I'll never forget so many things about him: how small he was. He was dressed in black. He was still in mourning. His handshake was very weak, very limp. And he had the absolute saddest expression I have ever seen on a human being's face, in particular his eyes. I'll never forget that. And then he jumped up on the top of a roof of a car and gave a spontaneous campaign speech that was awful. It was high-pitched, wasn't coherent. And I said to my friend, nothing like his brother. He's just not going to make it. I never met President Kennedy, but I was in awe of him based on television. And I just compared Robert to John, and to my view, no comparison. What a false impression that was, right? In retrospect. But it left me deflated, because I had thought, maybe there's hope that a Kennedy brother could pick up where his late brother left off. So first reaction was not very positive.
Do you think that's ultimately that sad expression that you mentioned is struck me. Not just that you said it again, I believe you mentioned it in the documentary, if I'm not mistaken. Where do you think that expression came from?
Oh, grief. He was in grief. He was, people that knew him well right after the president's death said he went into what we would call today clinical depression. He would never admit to that word, but he was a lost soul. He was heartbroken. And
I'm not sure we had such a term in the 60s. I don't think we understood
maybe not.
depression and overall mental health the same way in any fashion in the way that we do now.
Yep. And then I've been researching heavily, what he was going through because I feel there's a lot we can learn, both politically and personally. And a lot of it was a sense of guilt. He felt he had unleashed enemies that should have gotten him and not his brother. And even said to one of his aides, "I always thought they'd get one of us. I thought it would be me and not President Kennedy." So I think he was haunted by that as well as the loss. He was concerned about Jackie, about two children. He now had to hold the family together. There was so much going through. And on top of it was the pressure for him to pick up where his brother left off. And I think he was not sure he was ready to play that role. He'd always been behind the scenes. He'd always been President Kennedy's backdoor guy. This would have been a whole new change for him. And I think he was questioning whether he was able to fill that void.
Is it his relentless pursuit of organized crime that led him to think that he would be the target?
I think that was one of he had made more enemies as Attorney General than you can imagine. Organized crime, the anti-Castro Cubans who never forgave the president for the Bay of Pigs, the Southern politicians who were appalled at the civil rights movement that Robert Kennedy slowly but surely embraced. President Kennedy's foreign policy was creating anxiety among the military-industrial complex that President Eisenhower talked about. You name it, boy, he was making enemies left and right. And so I think he felt it all kind of came together and cost his brother his life.
At the risk of being terribly out of sequence here, where were you when President Kennedy was killed? Who do you believe was responsible?
I was in high school, this Jesuit high school. They announced it. One of my classmates stood up and applauded, and I tried to physically attack him, and I was held back, thank goodness. That's how I heard about it, and then I was riveted to the TV set that whole weekend, in a weekend of just horror. Most of your listeners, and you included, were not around to remember it, but I'll tell you, it was a national cataclysmic experience from the moment we heard the president was shot and then dead, and right until the killing of his accused assassin on live television, if you can imagine that,
Yeah.
to the haunting funeral, the sounds of the funeral. Today, I live near St. Matthew's Cathedral in Washington. Whenever I pass it by, my heart drops. Even to this day, that was the image of terrible loss. At that point, I had no idea that it could have been anything other than some lone nut who decided to make a name for himself. I don't believe that today. I think there's too much evidence that this was a lot more than a lone nut. But we still don't know the truth, right, as to what really happened in Dallas 60 years ago.
I get asked that a lot. I've never professed myself to be anything that I am not. I'm not some long lost, son of of either the president or the senator, but as Irish Catholic families are, they're extremely large. It's a very large family tree. They're over here and I'm somewhere over here, but it does come up from the same trunk, but a much different branch. And it's always been, not to get too far down into the rabbit hole, if you will, but President made so many enemies, and Bobby did too. And it seems to me that there's a name for the kind of chart where the circles cross over each other in the middle, and that 3 circles between the military industrial complex, because the president was going to pull out of Vietnam, the circle of that he had already regretted his tax cuts for the top marginal rate, dropping it from 91 to 74%, and he was going to not just change the CIA but dismantle it, and was quoted as saying so. And you know, the enemies list, if you will, that's a term that wasn't even valid then. That was a Nixon term, but still, the enemies list that they had made. And then, of course, you had Bobby with the mob, and they wanted to get back into Cuba. The military wanted to get back into Cuba. It seems to me that that chart where those three circles cross kind of does explain all of it, and it
I
might
agree.
actually explain all of the big three assassinations of the 60s, really.
Yes, yes. There was a clear intersection of all the forces that had the motive, and together, I think you can make the case they had the means, and they certainly created the opportunity. They were right before Dallas. There were two other attempts on President Kennedy's life, one in Chicago, one in Miami, that were stopped at the last minute. So this was something in the works in different possible locations, and one
And yet
turned
they
out.
still rode in an open car. Nothing,
Well, that was
something that modern, except for perhaps the Pope, no head of state does.
no,
Or
but that was built into the Kennedys. When I worked for Robert Kennedy, he took chances constantly, threw himself into crowds. He was not going to be put off by the threat that he knew would be real against him as well. And President Kennedy was the same way. He just said, I'm not going to live my life in the shadow of fear. I'm an elected president. The people are what makes me president. So he just refused any suggestions that he distance himself, including that day, not having a bubble top on the limousine. Even though it wasn't a bulletproof bubble top, it probably would have diverted a bullet. And he refused to ride in a bubble top limousine. So that was just their way of reacting to the political necessities of a democracy. As you had mentioned, democracy means you're in touch with people in every way, physically, spiritually, emotionally, and they really would thrive on that connection with people.
so, how did you start working for then Senator Kennedy? Did you work
Yes.
for him during his Senate run, or just the
No,
presidential?
no. During his Senate run, I went to some of his rallies to size him up, and I noticed improvement. He got better and better. There was a moment he was going to quit. He was very discouraged. He didn't feel it was natural for him. But he took speech classes to improve. He got better as it went on. Then he got angry, which you had to get Robert Kennedy angry for him to be at his best. And once he got angry, boy, the campaign turned around. But no, I didn't do anything until 1967. And that's when he sent his team up to Fordham. They convinced me. I showed up the next day, and I was putting in 12 to 14-hour days. I wrote papers instead of took classes, and I aced all my political science classes. The professors, by the way, and they were at Fordham, they were of all political ideologies. I had some very conservative professors. Even they said to me, you're going to learn more from him than you'll ever learn from me. Just write a paper about it. And I did that. And that got me hooked. And then we did double duty when he announced in March. We did double duty, Senate, and then the campaign. And then my life was just a whirlwind of excitement. As I say in the documentary, I was what was called a constituent case aide. I would handle letters, telephone calls from people desperately needing help, and Robert Kennedy was their last hope, and we would always intervene on their behalf, always get results. And it was because people knew this man could be president. And what I loved is using the power of his name to get a landlord, a doctor, you name it, to do the right thing because they were afraid. And I thought, wow, this is neat. So I loved playing that role in his office. And I was the lowest member of his team. So I got the brunt of all the stuff no one else really wanted to do, and I relished it.
While I think that the general demographic of our audience is a bit older, can you tell folks what a campaign was like then? I think we all think of it now as TV ads, 24-hour cable, Facebook posts, 40-character tweets, TikTok videos, things like that. What did you do? What was the campaign based on? Was it yard signs, appearances, radio ads? What was the campaign?
It really was more face-to-face personal contact, knocking
Door
on
knocking.
doors. going to rallies, distributing flyers. I ran field operations in New York. I would equip volunteers with flyers like the one you have in the back of you to the left. That was the basic RFK flyer, buttons. Um, I used to joke and say I played a material role in the campaign. Yeah, it was fun with materials, and it was so exciting. But yeah, it was old-fashioned to get out the vote operations. But contrary to the image of the well-oiled Kennedy machine, it was chaos. I mean, absolute chaos. He didn't have time to plan it the way President Kennedy had time. And you know what he lacked most of all? He lacked a Robert Kennedy to run it. We didn't have someone who played that role. So he, in effect, played both roles, which is very hard to do, is to manage
Oh,
your own campaign.
I have had the honor of consulting on campaigns across the country, and I'm again, I'm not. I don't want to take credit for things that I didn't do. Most of that consulting is just the candidate saying, "I'm having trouble with this," or "I just read this and see if you can clean it up," or, as you mentioned, speech preparation, which is something I think most candidates are. Forgive me, you know, they're awful at. They're dreadful. Some of them are the best people who are running for office for the best reasons are just poor candidates because I don't think we train them enough. I don't think that presentation means something. The ability to speak to an audience, make that eye contact, work around the room, change your volume and pitch within a speech. The vocabulary of a speech, even the New York Times is written for a fifth grade level. I mean, things like that. We don't do enough of that, but I know in the documentary there's some grainy footage of some just folks standing on corners in Manhattan just handing out flyers. So there was a lot of that, which we would consider extremely simple at this point. But is that what you're discussing, or
Yes.
do I have it off?
No, that was really all it was. It was that personal contact. Now, there was television, there was commercials. They were a key part of it. But what made his campaign different is how involved people were, masses of people. And by the way, it's not just him. Another candidate, Eugene McCarthy, had what was called the Children's Crusade. He had students all across America going to work for him. And it broke Robert Kennedy's heart because he felt that was his constituency. But Gene McCarthy was able to get in earlier and capture that constituency. And that was a painful thing for Robert Kennedy to go through.
And he entered the race, if I remember correctly from the documentary, not until March
That's correct.
of '68. Now, we seem to be, I think, 24-hour cable news, he uses the term loosely, um, has fomented this. Politics is campaigns bring ratings. Ratings brings advertising dollars, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think that's rocket science. I don't think I'm breaking any new ground here. But to think that a Kennedy, especially a sitting senator, entered a presidential race, what that would have been about 8 months before the general election, is kind of staggering compared to today. Is there any way that you can kind of, well, when you say it was chaos and it was just constant go, 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 you had to he actually entered after, I think, 3 primaries had already taken place. If I have
Uh,
that right.
Actually, no, New Hampshire was the only one that
Just
taken
New
place.
Hampshire.
And the myth is that he decided to go in after McCarthy won New Hampshire. Not true. He decided before New Hampshire, but he kept it quiet, and that caused the campaign to get off to a terrible start. McCarthy wins, and Robert Kennedy's getting off a plane, and he says to reporters, "I'm actively reassessing my decision." Well, the McCarthy people did not like that. They go, "Wow, you didn't even give our guy a moment in the sun before you got in." He was going to get in no matter what. So that was one of the myths of his campaign. But none of the background work, the organizational work that was so key to how President Kennedy got elected in 1960, none of that happened with Robert Kennedy's campaign. It was scramble and make up for lost time. So he got off to a very chaotic start, and yet, with the exception of Oregon, he won all the primaries that he entered.
And if I'm mistaken, again, please correct me. Mr. McCarthy was pretty well held. I mean, he was a liked individual. I mean, it's not unless I'm wrong, you're smiling at me, so maybe I'm wrong. But I
Well,
mean,
you
it seemed
mentioned
that he had a good ground wall of support. He had money. He had a campaign infrastructure. It seemed to me that there was a good segment of Democrats that would not have been terribly disappointed had he been the nominee.
I think you're right. He had courage to do it when no one else would. And Robert Kennedy turned it down. Robert Kennedy said, no, I can't do this. It'll be viewed as a personal vendetta against Lyndon Johnson. Get someone else. Now, McCarthy was not a fan of Robert Kennedy's, and the dislike was mutual. You go back to Catholicism, which I share with you. They were two very different types of Catholics. And McCarthy would often make fun of Robert Kennedy's religion. And that really rubbed Robert Kennedy the wrong way. So there was no love lost between the two. I like to compare them. It's a bit superficial. McCarthy's campaign was cerebral. It was an intellectual campaign. Robert's campaign was emotional. It was really based on his visceral hatred for things like poverty and war. And the contrast between the two was dramatic in my view. And McCarthy, I was not a fan of his at all. I thought he was a rather mean-spirited individual, and he ran what I thought was a mean campaign. In fact, he was quoted as telling his campaign aides after Lyndon Johnson dropped out, March 30th, I'll never forget that night. Last time I saw Robert Kennedy, by the way. McCarthy said, now we're going to force Bobby to run against Jack. Can you imagine that? That was McCarthy's reaction. So no, I had no good feelings about McCarthy, but I have to tip my hat to him. He had the guts to do it when no one else did. He energized students and got them to go clean for Gene. That was his slogan. They shaved, they cut their hair. So, he had a historical role to play, and he played it quite well.
When do you think was the final? Obviously, this would have taken place, as you mentioned, before you got involved. But what do you think the final decision making, or the? It's not right. We know the decision making process, but the final get over the line decision for him to say, you know what, I'm jumping in here.
He went to California to break the fast that Cesar Chavez had embarked on in Southern California. And he was surrounded by Mexican Americans who idolized him. And I think he felt the emotional need at that point to do something. It had been building up. People were begging him, you got to run, you got to run. Ethel was one of the biggest cheerleaders. You'll never be happy with yourself if you put it off. Life is too short. But I think going out to California on the flight back, he went to one of his aides and goes, I'm going to run. And he called Ethel, goes, Ethel, I'm going to run. That put him over the top. It was building up, but that being with Cesar Chavez and feeling that sense of a man who was fasting for a goal, I think it got to him, and he felt, I got to do this.
I think he was 40 days in at that point, or somewhere
fast
on his hunger strike. Yeah, I think he was in the 40-day range.
Yes.
When the senator went to see him and quite literally broke, there's film of it in the documentary, quite literally broke bed with him and said, eat with me.
Yes.
And it's odd. I hope I'm not using the word out of term. It looked very religious to me.
It was.
Very Gandhi-esque.
It was.
To me.
And Robert Kennedy really was more of a Catholic than, say, President Kennedy was. He really was. I wouldn't say devout, but he was a strong. He wasn't always in agreement with the church and the church's positions, but he felt in his heart he was a man of faith.
One of the other folks I tried to reach out to from the documentary, I haven't been able to find a way to contact her, is Miss Huertas, Dolores Huertas.
I'm in touch with her regularly. I just saw her a couple of months ago. She's great. Robert Kennedy adored her, told her things he didn't tell other people. But yeah, she's now in her 90s. So, and Ethel is in mid-90s too. Two of the women that, man, the impact they had on him was enormous.
I lost a thought that I wanted to say before, but in my campaign consultations with candidates across the country, and it's usually Democratic candidates in red districts who have no money. So I get the cream of the crop. But then again, they're not getting the cream of the crop with me either. But that said, one of the first things that I will tell a candidate is that you cannot be your own campaign manager and the candidate. Candidates who are their own campaign managers lose. So how did Bobby pull it off? Because as you mentioned, he was he was President Kennedy's. He he was the gears. He was the machine. He was the fuel. He was the organizer. He was the I don't the muscle, if you will. He was the force behind it. So he and you, as you mentioned quite rightly, he had no one like that
No.
for himself. So how did he do both?
How he did it, I'll never know. He didn't sleep much, I'll tell you that. He was constantly on the go, very demanding of himself first and foremost, and of all of us who worked for him. But he was, except for Oregon, he was winning. So he managed to do it, and that really showed the true nature of the man. What he had to submerge, though, was what he was for President Kennedy. He was a tough SOB. He prided himself on being that. He couldn't be that with his own campaign. That would have been asking too much. So, and he became a more tender person too. People told me if I knew him as Attorney General, I would not have liked him. He was a rather a cold and no nonsense guy. I'm not sure I wouldn't have liked him. I do like people like that, but apparently what he went through with the assassination of his brother really affected him personally in many ways, affected his temperament in many ways.
Can you tell me about the what you referred to in our phone conversation is the poverty tour? It's a piece of film that I've talked a lot about. It appears in the documentary. I talked about it a lot before the documentary was out. You can find it on YouTube. I should say go watch the damn documentary, watch the whole damn thing all the way through. But that particular piece of film that always jumps out at me, or always the first one that I remember, I should say. There's many different snippets throughout it, but is the white shirt, the suit pants, the suit jacket over the shoulder, visiting a black family. I want to say in the hills of West Virginia, but I might have that wrong. In a shack that is literally pieced together with corrugated metal that and wood that the family had either cut themselves or scavenged. They had no running water, no sewage, no electricity. They ate whatever they could catch, hunt, or fish. The children did not go to school. And whoever was talking over that particular piece of film talks about how he could connect with folks with just a look or a touch, and right then they show him taking the finger and going down the cheek of the young child. You mentioned to me on the phone, and I think the documentary says it pretty plainly, and it's always been my understanding as well, that it was that tour, if you will, did quite a number of things. Opened his eyes to things that he may not have known what was going on. Reinforced some of the things that he might have thought was going on. And may have been that last catalyst to say, no one's doing anything about this. And those people may have been, and I'm extrapolating a little bit, please tell me if I'm wrong. Those folks were President Kennedy's legacy because he didn't live long enough to help them.
Yes, you mentioned West Virginia. It was West Virginia that exposed John Kennedy to poverty. But this was Eastern Kentucky that did this for Robert Kennedy. And a third woman in his life who was very important. I mentioned Ethel. I mentioned Dolores Huerta. Was Marion Wright, now Marion Wright Edelman, who married Peter Edelman, the speechwriter for Robert Kennedy. She was very skeptical about Robert Kennedy, but she put the tour together for him to bring him to Eastern Kentucky. And she said, I know when someone is faking it. He wasn't faking it because he would touch the sores of poor black children whose parents wouldn't even touch their sores. And he did. And she said, you don't fake that. And he did it when no one was watching. It wasn't like I'm going to put on a little show now for the media. That was not what he was doing. And that really had a tremendous effect on him and on the people he met. We recreated that tour in 2008. Peter Edelman and I recreated that tour. And it was heartbreaking because in that case, it was 40 years later. So little has changed. The poverty is blatant poverty, deep poverty. That's the sad part, that despite a so-called war on poverty, The old Ronald Reagan joke, which is a terrible joke, but it had a germ of truth. We declared war on poverty, and poverty won. And the end result today is 43 million people in poverty, same number as it was when the war on poverty was declared.
Was that entirely accurate? The Great Society programs cut poverty in half. They did not eliminate it. No, absolutely not. They did not eliminate it. And within a capitalist society, even economists will tell you there's always going to be poor folk. But the Great Society programs did cut poverty in half. And if the New Deal programs had not been chipped away at, even Medicare had to, we had to put this 20% donut hole in it to get it passed. It was supposed to be our national healthcare system. It was going to cover 100% for everybody 65 and over, and after 10 years it was going to drop to 55, and after 10 more years to 45, until everybody was covered and we wouldn't have a private for-profit healthcare system in this country. There was no measurable student debt prior to Ronald Reagan. There was no measurable homelessness program prior to Ronald Reagan. Isn't that kind of a bit of BS that these programs didn't work? They were chipped away at. They were attacked from the moment Republicans read the bills.
No, you're absolutely right. Without them, things would have been much, much worse. But the fact is, when you overall look at the state of poverty in America, the rate, say, among children, 20% poverty among children, that's the highest in the world. In the world. And after declaring war on poverty, and we still have that poverty rate, I think the overall verdict is we failed to do it the way we should have. If we didn't have Medicare and Medicaid, which is the real program for poverty, God help how badly we would be. So it could always be worse, but as Robert Kennedy would say, we could do much better, much, much better.
Do you think it was the poverty tour that got the senator to start asking those questions? It seems to me when he's I'm trying to remember, I hope I'm remembering it right, the film of that same family in Eastern Kentucky, where he's kind of they're behind him and the cameras, and they're talking to him about what you saw here today, and he said this isn't what America's supposed to be. Essentially, I'm paraphrasing very badly, probably, but this isn't acceptable. It shouldn't be acceptable to any of us that this is how, in the richest country in the world, this is how we are. Do you think it was that tour that may have kind of codified that message of who, and get the senator to a point where he started asking questions of us? Because as you and I talked about on the phone, I'm repeating a lot of it because the audience wasn't there for that, but it seems to me that his 68 campaign was just as much about questioning, holding up a mirror to America, as it was saying, we're the richest country on earth, we can do better, we can stop war, we can end poverty. But I think he was asking us questions too. Is this acceptable to you? Is this the America that you want?
And one of his quotes was, in a nation of prosperity, the existence of poverty is evil. He used the word evil. He made it a moral crusade that we're all responsible for each other. And how can we allow this, especially with children? He really felt, and I've had this discussion with policy folks saying, poverty among adults, you can never justify it, but you can understand why some people might feel it's the responsibility of each adult to try to get themselves out of poverty. I don't accept that myself, but you can understand it. But with children, they don't choose
the old bootstrap argument, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. But of course, if you can't afford boots.
Yeah. Children don't ask to be born. They don't ask to whom they're born. It's a matter of, fate and accident. And to think of the social cost of a child in poverty, malnutrition and illness, what we end up paying over the long haul for that, even if we had no morality to it at all, it just is in our self-interest not to let children be poor, because we pay a price for that reason alone, it was something that we should address. But he saw it in a real moral dimension. And he would often quote Camus, the French existentialist, saying, if all you can try to do in life is reduce the number of children who suffer, and if you don't, who will? And he would love to quote that. If you don't, who will? That night, he came back from Kentucky, and I'm still in touch with his children. And they said he was just torn. And he said to all of them at dinner, I just came back from a place where people can't afford to eat the way we eat. You have to do something about it. He said this to his children. You have to do something about this. We have an obligation to people to make sure that they don't suffer. And so it really got to him.
You mentioned earlier that he was a bit more devout and practicing than President Kennedy. I have hosted, God, it might be a half a dozen different programs on our program. Episodes of our program is the word I'm digging for somewhere deep in the recesses of my brain, clearing the cobwebs out. On the state of Christianity today, I consider myself lucky after wandering in the wilderness for quite a number of years, being very angry about the deaths of certain family members and so on. I'm kind of abandoned faith to a great extent, and probably within the last 10 years or so have continually been moving more and more forward, more and more back into it. And as a Moravian here in the center of Moravianism, Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, have found the church again and have been, when the pain in my body is good enough that I can actually go to services. I stream services every week. It would seem to me, well, let me back up again. We've spent a lot of time on the program with theologians, with active clergy, with clergy who are now teachers to other clergy, about this corporatization of Christianity, the quote unquote evangelical movement, it's the corporatization, the prophetization of Christianity. I know, folks, I know you just got your Social Security checks and you have to make that decision between food and medicine, but God says I need a new jet. Would seem to me that we've talked a lot on the program about what true Christianity is and what policies government can put in and still keep that wall, by the way, that fulfill the golden rule, do unto others. Bobby's message is a terribly, terribly Christian message, is it not?
Oh, absolutely. But he had a famous quote too. He said, all the priests hate me and all the nuns love me. I thought that was a very telling comment, right? The priests are kind of the big boys of the Catholic Church. They're the success models. They're all living nice lives. The nuns are out there struggling. They do the face-to-face with children. And so he
take care of the sick, house the poor, et cetera, et cetera.
He was not tolerant of some of the church's problems way back then. God knows how he would react to the issues confronting the church today. So he was a deeply Catholic person, but not quite in sync with all the Catholic Church's teachings.
Well, if I'm not using a modern term for a past practice, but would you more of a progressive Catholic, if you will?
Yep. Although on certain issues, like back then, abortion was not even an issue. I'd have to think that he would have had a problem with abortion. I mean, he would probably say, I'm a good example. 10 kids and the 11th on the way. And he resented the role, and this might be more detail than your listeners care about, but we had in New York, Cardinal Spellman was the Archbishop of New York at the time, and he was a pro-war cardinal, supported the war in Vietnam. He was very political. He supported Richard Nixon over John Kennedy. Here you got the first Catholic running for president, and the Archbishop of New York is supporting the opposition. So Robert Kennedy had a very difficult time with Cardinal Spellman. And again, the dislike was mutual. So I was exposed to that very strong. And yet his successor, Cardinal Cook, Robert Kennedy, thought the world of him. He ended up presiding over the funeral in St. Patrick's. I
actually do think it's one of the great things that the documentary does well. as you have said here a couple different times, it doesn't really sugarcoat much. When it mentions, as you said, G. McCarthy didn't like Robert Kennedy, and he didn't like him either. And J. Edgar Hoover hated the Kennedys, and they didn't like him either. And so, and on and on and why not? I mean, it's the truth. We're not making anything up, and we're not saying it for dramatic effect. I think one of the great things the documentary does is not talk about his personal life and the rumors with this actress and that staffer and blah blah blah. It sticks pretty much to his record and so on. But I do, one of the great truths of the documentary is, well, this guy didn't like the Kennedys, and they don't like him either, and they don't like this group, and they don't like him either, and
I gotta
right, it's the
acknowledge,
truth of it.
no, I've got to acknowledge Dawn Porter, the director. She's a brilliant director. She's got a movie out now about Lady Bird Johnson, believe it or not. And by the way, Lyndon Johnson added him to the list of mutual dislike
Right now.
at the
Yeah.
highest level. But she even said to me, she goes, Bill, I know you're very close to the Kennedy family. They don't know we're doing this. I don't want them to know. I want this movie to stand on its own. I don't want it to sugarcoat. And I said, okay, first of all, I've never spoken to anyone until you. You're the first one. I didn't want the attention. But she played it right. And I think it shows that the documentary is credible. It's not a sugarcoating. It recreates exactly the way it happened, I think, in just about every way. She even had a real critic of Robert Kennedy, who we never heard of, by the way. She found this New Jersey politician. None of us heard of him. And he's on the screen a lot, saying nothing good about Robert Kennedy. But that was the way the documentary was structured.
Yeah, and it covers the years that he was chief counsel to the McCarthy hearings.
Yep.
Something now that Americans look back on with disdain. In fact, they might not be looking back on it quite enough, as we have the likely Republican nominee talking about trying critics and using the courts to and so on and so on and so on. I think we might want to look back on the McCarthy hearings just a little bit. It's always been one of the premises of this program from the time that I started it, that the lessons of history are indisputable. We might try to interpret a bit of why someone did what they did or what they might have been feeling at the time and so on, but the lessons are irrefutable. The Great Depression was referred to up until I think the late 40s, the Republican Great Depression.
Yes.
And it was a direct result of massive tax cuts in the Gilded Age and complete deregulation of the economy. The New Deal worked. We did put a man on the moon. These programs work. History, everything that's wrong in this country now, and I mean everything, we already know how to fix all of it. We just don't have either the political will, or the billionaires have bought the political will of the people who are fighting against it. You and I talked on the phone that I don't think the Republican Party is a functioning political party anymore. I believe it's a corporation. The employees are the office holders. The owners are the donors. And I wasn't trying to make a dumb rhyme there, but the owners are the big billionaire class, the donors that own it. We also have the Koch network, which employs more people than both parties put together. Mm-hmm. It also cycles through more money than both parties put together. But the United States is number one in a lot of things. We're number one in infant mortality out of the first world nations. We're number one in student debt. We're number one in corporate debt. We're number one in personal credit debt. We're number one in the percentage of our percentage and number of our residents and citizens that are uninsured for healthcare. Maternal mortality, we're number one at that, and we are really way number one for women of color in maternal mortality. Is there any way, without trying to make you a personal psychologist, the senator, what would Bobby say of these things today?
Unacceptable was his favorite word. This is unacceptable. But we all have to take responsibility. I remember one time he goes in front of a bunch of medical students, and he talked about the need for health care as a right, not a privilege. And one of these young medical students raised his hand and said, "It's all well and good, Senator. Who's going to pay for this?" And Robert Kennedy pointed his finger at him and said, "You are, and you are, And he pointed at all of them in the room. He told them what they did not want to hear because that
Mhm.
was the right answer. And that was the thing about him that I miss the most in today's political discourse. He didn't pander. He did not pander. He told people things that made them uncomfortable, that they didn't want to hear because he felt it was important for them to hear the truth. And that really rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, that he deliberately got people out of their comfort zone.
Well, Senator Sanders tells us that if we just reinstituted, there used to be a stock transaction tax. It was part of the New Deal. Actually, it was a meant to be a stop, a break on Wall Street. This ridiculous speculative trading and just trades flying everywhere. And so much of the trading on Wall Street now is done electronically. Some of it is even done by artificial intelligence, and it's done in those computer generated breaks, halts in trading, some trading actually generated by computer to keep the markets steady. And if we put a point, I always get this one wrong. It's 2 zeros, I'm pretty sure. 0.001 tax, electronic stock transaction tax. We could generate enough money every single year to pay for a national healthcare system, eliminate student debt, eliminate people's credit card debt. So we know the answers,
Yeah,
don't we? I mean, we know the answers to some of these things.
yeah. How about this?
No, if not all of them.
Social Security is something I specialize in. You know, if you make more than $162,000, you don't pay into Social Security. Talk about reverse regressivity, right?
Senator Sanders has mentioned this too. If we just eliminate the cap,
Right. That
Social
would
Security will be solvent for a minimum of, I think it is another 70 years.
not quite. It doesn't go. It's not the only part of the solution, but it's a big part of it. But could I put a plug in for what I do for a living, Jeff? I don't want
Heck
to
yes, of
violate.
course you can.
Yeah, we did a report on economic security in the 21st century, and it's on the website of the National Academy of Social Insurance, nasi.org. I asked people to go on and read that report because it lays out not only the problem, 100 policy options. By the way, we don't recommend anything. We don't say we support option A over option B. We let others pick the ones they want. But we have a whole section on funding, and we go into things like the wealth tax, the financial transactions tax, on how they would be feasible ways to bring more money in if we are committed to reducing economic insecurity among 100 million people. So I encourage your viewers, your listeners, to go on our website, take a look at that, and I'd be eager to get feedback on.
And give me that web address one more time.
N as in national, A as in academy, S as in social, I as insurance, nasi.org, O-R-G. And we have everything we've ever written about Social Security, Medicare, unemployment insurance, workers' compensation, all these programs that, can you imagine America without them? And yet they were all very controversial when they were launched back in the New Deal. But we did it.
Republicans hated Social Security from the outset.
Yep. We had a leader who believed in it. We had a country that was going through hell, and he took advantage of that. Medicare, with all due respect, Lyndon Johnson realized that we can't be a nation that at least doesn't protect the elderly and children, and Medicare and Medicaid were the answers for that. So we do have a rich legacy of well thought out government interventions that some people ideologically don't want the government intervening in just about anything other than your personal freedom, maybe. But it's all there. And going back to what you said, we know the answer. We know the answers. It's the will and the willingness to pay that is needed.
I think there's folks who actually do have the will. They've been bought out. I mean, there's a substantial number of Republican office holders now who are younger. All they know is a Reagan country. It's one of the reasons that I am inspired by and I've had young folks on the program quite a lot, that I'm so hopeful, or they give me hope that folks who are we're 40 plus years into this Reagan austerity trickle down myth of trickle down economics and so on, massive tax cuts. The answer to everything is tax cuts. Slow economy, cut taxes for the rich. Great economy, cut taxes for the rich. After all, it's your money. Slow sending the entire industrial base over to China, cut taxes. The answer to everything is a bad word, tax cut. I'm trying to keep myself from doing bad. I don't do bad words normally, but boy, that one almost came out. Not a very Christian thing to be effing all over the. But the answer to everything can't be a tax cut, because it can't work both ways. Slow economy, tax cut. Great economy, tax cut. It can't be the answer to everything. And so there are some real committed souls. I mean, they're bought and paid for by billionaires. They don't know anything other than what the billionaires tell them to spew. And sadly, there's still a bit of our party that does the same thing. My party. I shouldn't say that's your party as well. I think it is, but I'm shouldn't put that on top of you. But that is all too willing to continue this with. I'm a supporter of President Biden and will vote for him. I believe very much he should be reelected. He has done very significant things. It might just be the most progressive administration certainly since President Johnson, quite possibly since the New Deal. And yet still, the fundamental building blocks, if you will, to the trickle-down austerity, Reaganism, massive tax cuts, to Santa Claus theory economy is still there. For God's sakes, Louis DeJoy is still running the post office. We haven't broken this down. 7:01, entering the second hour of our program. I am Jeff Kennedy, your host and presenter, if you will. We are the Kennedy Effect live for the 21st of January, 2024. We'll open the phone later in the program. I'm going to steal as much knowledge from Mr. Arnone as I can take while he's willing to stay. Wherever you might be across Facebook, we've shared the program to just shy of 100 places. I have a few more to do as soon as Facebook takes me out of jail. You can watch wherever you are right now. To every single person, group, large and small, public, private, global, wherever, regional, global, local. Thank you for allowing us to be part of your corner of the Facebook universe. It means everything to us. We couldn't do it without you. That other side of information is our home group Facebook page and my personal timeline, Jeff Kennedy's, where you can watch, comment, ask questions of me or Mr. Arnone while he is here. Do it there. I will see it. I will ask the questions. We are live right now on YouTube as well. You can put comments in there. I will see them there. We're live in a bunch of different places all at the same time. God bless technology. Put your questions in there, comments. Tell me I'm way off base. Agree. Nobody ever has to agree with me. That's not the point of the program. It's about education and facts and truth and history. But you never have to agree with me. Put your comments in there as well. We want to take them. We want to talk about them. YouTube.com/that other side of information. Hot101.net. Our name is our web address. If you can connect to the internet, you can listen to us. Desktops, laptops, tablets, phones, Bluetooth it into speakers, Bluetooth it in the car. And of course, America's favorite game show that I have not played for several weeks right now. You can tell Alexa, hey, Alexa, play hot101.net, because many months ago I did that live on the air and I triggered somebody's Alexa, and I'm a silly spoiled child and I thought it was hilarious, and now I keep doing it because I want to turn on your Alexa as you listen on the phone. So I keep doing it. If I trigger anybody's Alexa, please tell me. I will be way more proud of myself than I really should be. Also part of the TCP Media Group, happy to be part of them, and of course our loan sponsor, the PayGive app, www.paygive.org, a financial transaction app where you can also purchase gift cards, make purchases, and so on. All of these cash apps make their money by taking a piece of your transaction. Well, what PayGive does is they tell you that you can take a piece of that profit that they would make, and you can designate it to a charity of your choice. Animal charities, veterans charities, health-related charities like the American Cancer Society, Shriners Hospitals, things like that. And you can buy from anywhere, Home Depot, Walmart, Target, all the big boys, all the big international places. About 50,000 vendors are available through the PayGive app. Paygive.org. When you buy things, you have to pay for them. Why not give while you do it? Our guest is William Arnone. He's staying as long as he wishes. He will tell me when he has to go. I will chew his ear off and steal as much out of his brain as I possibly can, as long as he's willing to stay. The second hour of the program, we're going to try to take you right up till 9. Villain's View comes your way at 9 p.m. on our home group Facebook page, That Other Side of Information, and live on hot101.net. And again, at the risk of bouncing around very, very badly in a timeline, if I can go back to the quote unquote poverty tour, when do you think the senator made the connection that others had not yet made? When he visits Cesar Chavez, when he makes the poverty tour and realizes that it's, yes, there are poor white families, but there's a lot more poor black families, that everyone deserved the same level of life, the same level of support, the same level of opportunity, because at some point those color barriers disappear from him. What was it, the poverty tour that you think that did that? Was it his conversations with Dr. King? What do you think triggered that?
It was
Did
a
you ever have a
host.
chance to talk to him about it?
It was a host of things. Don't forget, he represented New York State. New York State, by the way, upstate New York is part of Appalachia.
Yeah, yes, it
People
is.
don't realize that. He would disappear late at night and go to Harlem, go to Bedford-Stuyvesant, go to poor sections of New York to experience firsthand what their lives were like. This was not new to him. It was building up. So there wasn't one thing that did it. It was an accumulation of life experiences that he was exposed to. And by the way, he developed a pilot program in Bedford-Stuyvesant to bring business into the poorest part of New York and let business leaders begin to produce some programs that could help people. So he wasn't let the government do it all. He knew that was not the complete answer. So this was something he was focused on over the course of the last several years of his life, but it all kind of culminated. And the other thing that got him to feel, I have to do this, there was a civil rights commission that Johnson had set up called the Kerner Commission, and they issued a report called The Two Societies, one black and one white, and that if we didn't address the needs of people of color, we would have two countries, and we would not be pleased with either. And Johnson ignored the report. And for Robert Kennedy, that was the last straw. How do you set up this commission? It tells you what you don't want to hear, and then you ignore it. So that really got to him too. I think that's when he started to say, Johnson is hopeless. I've got to do something. So I think it was a culmination of a lot of different things. But the most important factor was his firsthand experience talking to people who were living in poverty. That really got to him.
Is there any way that you can explain to folks the rock star reactions that he would get in these live crowds? I'm sure you were there for some of these rallies.
Jeff, they were frightening. It was frightening because I say this in the documentary. I had this sense of this is not going to end well. I just had that sense. I was not alone. He's out there. It doesn't take much. They were some of these events were frightening with the frenzy with which he was greeted. People tore his cufflinks. I don't know how many pairs of cufflinks. They tore the PP-109 tie clasps. They tore his tie. One woman got his shoes. He was out there, and it was like, they're not going to hurt me. They're my people. Not going to hurt me. Well, it was frightening. There were points where we just say, this is getting out of control. And I was concerned because the TV coverage was scaring people too. It's like, wow, he's stirring up trouble. He's out there, and the masses are responding. It did not, if you did a political calculation, probably was not a positive political impact when there were scenes of him in sections of the country that were just overwhelmingly trying to have a contact with him. And the word I used was frenzy, and it really was not completely pleasant.
I don't want to. I want to back up from that, but not back up from that all at the same time, which doesn't make any sense. That's a crazy thing to say, but I understand everything that you just told me, but can you tell me more about the there's film there of folks, they're in tears, they're trying to hug him, they're trying to tell him their problems, their people letters and notes and hug, try to give him a hug, and there's the geez, I'm losing it now, whether it was the senatorial where he would just go into people's homes and sit at their kitchen table. I mean, is there any way to kind of explain that? I can't imagine a Nikki Haley or a Donald Trump, or to be blatantly honest with you, Vice President Harris or President Biden, walking into a really dirt poor family's kitchen and just sitting there and talking to them for 5 minutes, let alone an hour or more. And I guess that's why I use the term rock star. The people who would see him and just burst into tears and want literally want to hug him, and here's a letter, here's a card, here's a picture of my kid. Is there any way to explain that part of it? I understand the danger part of it. No politician would do that today. Again, even the Pope rides in a bubble car. But is there any way you can kind of tell us about that? Because it's extraordinary. I mean, it's Beatles-esque. It's you see families that are desperate, but you see also people that look like they're middle class and maybe even above. They
Yeah.
just lose it. They want to hold him, they want to touch him, they want to hug him, they want to tell, please come to my neighborhood, we need your help. Come into my business, I'll buy you lunch, or that kind. I mean, all these different things.
He had that magnetism. I think part of it was the if I can touch him, it would have been like a connection to President Kennedy, whose pictures were in their homes. So he was that kind of living connection to a martyred president that was a part of it. Part of it was himself, just the kind of person he was, the reality of the sadness that he exuded. So I think it's just a combination of things, but he really filled a vacuum in American political life. There was no competition for that passion in the country. Nobody liked that. And I think that's he filled that vacuum, and it was remarkable.
Was that
Yes,
considered to still be a newer form of campaigning? Because we're
yes,
talking about the 50s and 60s here, where the majority of the political class, easy for me to say, always easy when the radio guy can't enunciate his words. The political class was still, they were World War II vets. And that's just not how you conducted yourself.
yes, yes. And we called it new politics. It was the new politics. Adam Walensky put the whole strategy together. He said, we're going to do something no one else has done. We're going to take the campaign to the people, not to the bosses. The American Party was back room. You get the nomination. It was all done behind the closed doors. There were only 14 primaries, by the way. It wasn't every state. And he was committed to go the primary route and proved his case to the people. But ultimately, he would have had to sell his candidacy to the bosses, the Mayor Daley's of the world. They would have been the decision makers. But if you want the best example of what he was the train ride from New York to Arlington, when millions of people line. I was on the train. I've never experienced anything like that in my life. It should have been a 3-hour train ride. It was an 8-hour train ride. The heat went down, the booze ran out, and all we cared about was look at these people. It was a mosaic of America. Every type of group was out there. Every race, every age, every profession, you name it. They lined the streets with their last farewell. It was an amazing event. And that to me said it all.
In that part of the documentary that films the train ride from outside one of the cars, the windows. I was born and raised in New Jersey. I live in Pennsylvania now, obviously, but I was born and raised in New Jersey, as far west in New Jersey as you can get before you cross into Pennsylvania. In fact, my town was, most people thought we were Pennsylvania. It is the easternmost bit of the Lehigh Valley on the Phillipsburg, New Jersey, on the Delaware River. And the parts of the train ride that are clearly in New Jersey. And there's one bit that specifically stuck out to me because it's the New Brunswick train station. And on the platform are children who are filthy. They're in tattered clothes. One of them, if I remember, is holding a sign that says farewell next to a gentleman in kind of leftovers, I guess, from the 40s and 50s, fedora, full suit, holding his suitcase next to a woman who's in her Sunday best with the purse, the arms up here and the purse on her elbow, in tears. And that, I mean, all the film from that says something to, but New Brunswick really said something to me because I saw it straight away, New Brunswick, New Jersey, and the number of folks on that platform, and just what you said, the differentiation among those folks, including folks of color who were standing right next to white folks, and everyone was silent. Some took the hat off and went, and that train probably could have circled the country for months, and that probably would have kept up.
I think you're right. People were singing together. It was a poignant experience. There's a great book by Paul Fusco with pictures of the entire train ride that people want to just relive it. That book is beautiful. And boy, that just, to me, it was an amazing experience and devastating. I ended up going upstate New York and disappearing for 2 weeks. I just couldn't deal with the reality of what had happened. So he touched the nerve, and it was a passionate one. I've got the brunt of it in his office because I would be the one to handle those pleas for help. I wasn't the only one, but I probably did more of them. And that
Where was the office?
On Lexington Avenue and 45th Street. The old, so you
Yeah,
talk
I
about
know,
the U.S. It's the old
Yeah.
U.S. Post Office. It still is to this day.
Yeah,
U.S.
yeah.
Post Office. We had one floor. Jacob Javits had the floor above us as the Republican senator,
Yeah.
and his office was just a phenomenal place. It was exhilarating. The energy, the action, and we had fun. I was able, and I don't tell this story in the movie, but I'll tell it to you. I was able to imitate him very well. And what they had me do is I would dictate Western Union telegrams on his behalf, and I would call. I can't do it today, but I would imitate him. And a Western Union operator, I'd be dictating the telegram, and then the Western Union operator said, "And who is this signing it?" And I would say Robert F. Kennedy, and his voice screams, shouts, "I've got Bobby on the phone," and I'm thinking, boy, if she only knew she's not talking to him. But
there's something. There is something about. I'm Irish. I have a bit of a twinge, especially more BBC I watch when I talk to my mates back from that, have gone back to Ireland. My best friend in the world called me today from Manchester, England. It'll get worse. But I've got that accent is something. That's something. I don't even know what to call it. I mean, it's not just New England. That's about the thickest accent, a New England accent I think I may have ever come across. I mean, it's something special. Is there any way? So you mentioned the office was always a very active place, flurry of activity, but also exceptionally, no matter how many hours you worked, everybody still, go, great positive energies. Is there any way to describe, well, not just the emotion of it, which I think is actually not rocket science. I think we can all figure that out. What happened in the office after the assassination? Did you close up? Did you just sit there and go, what do we do now? What happened?
Yeah, it was terrible because the first thing, thank goodness, the Kennedy family was so considerate of what we were going through, even though they were going through it at a much worse level. But they said, look, the last event, let's make it the best. Let's put together the best funeral ever. And we did. They put us to work organizing the funeral. And then once that was over, I disappeared. I came back. We had a box everything. To this day, the office's boxes are sealed, which I'm trying to get unsealed for my research. But it was, and then a lot of politicians reached out to us. The one that I resented most was Nelson Rockefeller. He reached out to us. I want to pick up where Bobby left off. Said, first of all, you have no right to call him Bobby. I mean, that's, who are you? And we said, get lost in more vulgar terms. The one who we respected was George McGovern, because Robert Kennedy thought the world of George McGovern. And McGovern held us together. He formed something called the National Corps, a National Action Corps. And that was kind of an informal way just to keep us together. And a couple of the people who ran the office, who've all since passed away, would get us together for a couple of events. that were just heartbreaking events because we just, we lost it. And then I couldn't go to the convention. A lot of them went to the convention. I couldn't do it. I just couldn't bear the thought of being in Chicago in August of 1968 without him. And I watched it on television. It was just, if any of your listeners remember, it was a disastrous convention.
Do you believe the convention would have been as violent as it was had he survived and been the nominee?
No, no. But I
Well, that's
also,
always been my impression that there would probably have still been protests and whatnot, but that it would have been largely, if not exclusively, peaceful.
I think so. But one thing, and I'm a contrarian voice, I don't think he would have gotten the nomination. I don't think Lyndon Johnson would have let that happen. So despite his winning California, he would have won New York. I don't think they would have let him be the nominee.
Would he have won the election if he was the nominee?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. You know, as much as we saw him through the lens of someone who was courageous, the hatred toward him, and Richard Nixon would have capitalized on it. So I am not one who thinks he would have been either nominated, or if nominated, I don't think he would have been elected. I just think it was not in the cards.
Well, I'm going to disagree with you there.
No, please do. And I'm alone.
I just and for no other reason than my opinion. I mean, I think that's a part of history that is interpretive because we don't know, because his life was cut short. And so there's no, I mean, we could look at poll numbers and constituencies and who had more money and endorsements and things. I happen to believe he would have been the nominee. I don't see how they could have denied it to him. And I happen to think he would have won because I think it would have, Nixon didn't beat Kennedy's. He just didn't.
Yes.
And, that's just my opinion. And it's my opinion and nobody has to agree with it. And that's a beauty of the country. Nobody has to agree with it. Is there any way did you ever happen to talk to the senator about, when you and I talked on the phone, we talked about the very heavy weight that Ted Kennedy carried of two dead brothers.
Yes. Yes.
And the legacy that he felt he had to fulfill. Is there any way what about Bobby? It always seemed to me, you talked about the sadness that was always in his face. And you do see that even in those crowds, even in those frenzied crowds, the old film of those crowds that we see in the documentary, even with the smiles, even with the jokes, as you talked about, as he improved as a speaker, the natural humor seemed to come out more, the kind of the quick wit, almost the sarcastic wit, and then a smile, the whole crowd laughs, but still something here
Yes.
was always weighty and sad. And my suspicion is, look, I was born after the senator was assassinated, so it's not like I ever talked to him. I do think he felt very much like Teddy, that he had a legacy to fulfill, and he carried that sadness, and it was weighty. It worked on him. Did you ever discuss it with him, or do you have a way to
I could not
educate us on it?
I couldn't discuss it with him. I could just feel it through him in my interactions with him. That was always my takeaway. This is still a very hurt individual, but he was dealing with it in a good way. But he would often say, even the crowds that he attracted, he would often say, especially early on, he would say, they're not for me, they're for him. So he always was under that shadow that this is all for him. But the night he won California, he did confide. I was not there that night, thank goodness, because I don't think I would have survived. He said to a couple of people that night, I think I'm on my own. He felt that was the primary that got him to feel that, all right, now this vote was for me. So I thought that was a big turning point in how he was viewing the rest of the campaign.
I do think he wanted to be senator. I think he wanted to be president. I think if he didn't want to run for president, he never would have. I think he was that strong enough of an individual. But I do think it would seem to me that weight comes with it, like it or not. Once you get involved in politics, everything that President Kennedy stood for, because again, they were standing right next to each other. They were there together through the whole thing. It's automatic. Even if everything he was trying to do was separate from the president, you can't help but have that
Yes.
right
Yes.
here.
Yeah. I want to point out one other thing too, because you started off talking about his view on poverty. When I was at Hickory Hill, he had framed on a yellow pad the word poverty 7 times that was scrawled by President Kennedy at his last cabinet meeting. Isn't that something? He scrawled the word poverty. Jackie gave it to Robert as a memento, and Robert had it framed. And that made me realize that even though John Kennedy and Robert Kennedy were very different, John, I think, was more aloof, more detached. Even John knew in the last weeks of his life that poverty was an issue that had to be addressed. I think that had a big effect on Robert as well.
Well, I think if you look at you and I have talked a lot about the film of those rallies and the campaign stops and so on. I think you see that with President Kennedy. He was happy to be in the crowd. He was happy to give a speech, but the speeches were just a little more formal.
Yes.
They were a little more structured. It was suit and tie. Bobby,
Yes.
no jacket, no tie, shirt sleeves rolled up, and they were a little more off the cuff. They were a little more, just a little more gut to them, if you will.
Yes.
Not that either, I mean, both things work, and they're both riveting speeches, and they both gave many riveting speeches
Yes.
that we all still quote today. But even in those crowds, there's more of a formality to President Kennedy.
Yes.
He stuck his hands in with the crowd too, and all that stuff. And I can't imagine the number of selfies a Bobby Kennedy would have to be taking right now in this
Yeah.
selfie society. And those rope lines would be hours and hours long. But there's more of a, not a great word. There's more of a human connection there. There's more of a titular, uh, well, you said it earlier, emotional connection there
Yes. Yes.
than there was with
Another
President Kennedy.
another vivid example of it was after Martin Luther King was killed. Uh, there was a funeral, and people marched from Atlanta to his burial. And Robert Kennedy was the only white elected official who marched with everybody else. The others were afraid to. And that tells you something too. And Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King were not buddy-buddy. But
Well, no, the documentary tells us that it was Attorney General Kennedy who had authorized the wiretapping of Dr. King.
yes, yes, yes. But the people that day, they just swarmed over Robert Kennedy. They viewed him as a brother. He was one sign you saw, he loved it. It said, RFK, white but all right. He loved that. It was like, he was not one, he didn't want overstatement. I'll take that. That's good enough for me. The other thing he did, and this is not well known, he didn't just go to people's homes and meet with people who were suffering. He met with gangs. He met with black gangs. He met with black Panthers who were voicing hatred for America, and they let him have it. So he wouldn't just go to the so-called vulnerable. He went to powerful new emerging forces and exchanged views with them, and sometimes they were not pleasant conversations. He took a lot of crap, and he would have used another word, people who was letting him have it. So he was not.
It's funny. We were just talking about this last week on the program. The original snowflake. For me,
Yeah.
the original, this term snowflake that sadly Trump has popularized, but
Yeah.
it's not an inaccurate label for some folks. But the original snowflake, it would seem to me, was Ronald Reagan
Yeah. Yeah.
and the California legislature. Because
Yeah.
when the Black Panthers went to Sacramento with rifles on their shoulders, in 3 weeks, you had gun control laws.
Yeah, right, exactly.
The original
Yeah.
snowflake, because the
Mhm.
Panthers said, this is your right. The law says you can protect yourself. So protect yourself.
Yes.
And they did. And within 3 weeks, legislators of both parties overwhelmingly, boom, all of a sudden we couldn't be carrying rifles on our shoulders anymore in California.
Amazing.
Original
Mhm.
snowflake.
Wow. Let me ask you, Jeff, just what got you interested in Robert Kennedy? What was the first point where you said, "Look, I want to pay more attention to him"?
Well, again, we're very all the genealogy research that has ever been done on my behalf, or that my own family has done, is that we are very distantly related.
Okay.
It's like 3 or 4 times removed. Again, I will never, ever, ever sit on this program and tell you that I am the long lost, uh, uh, to to borrow the 12th tribe. I'm not the lost 12th child. I'm
Yes,
not. I'm not. I'm not. But it's a very, again, Irish Catholic family trees are very, very large. So there, that part comes through. Well, you can tell that too, because I have all the idealism and the politics. I can't shut up. That's why I do radio. But I have none of the money. So I don't have the key code for the entry at the Hyannis. I guarantee you I don't. But I've told this story on the program before. I ran for my first office when I was 5 years old.
5.
5. I ran to be my student council class representative for
And
my
what were you,
kindergarten class.
kindergarten? Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
And it was me and one other kid who I was friends with my entire schooling life. And so we had to give a speech. And I thought, well, brilliant, because that doesn't scare me. I love giving speeches. Even at 5, I love giving. My mother would tell you I didn't shut up. And I was actually part of the generation, to quickly go down a rabbit hole to talk about trickle down and austerity and so on. I learned how to read and write from Sesame Street
Yes, yes.
and from PBS. But that said, so I stood up in front of the class and I said, folks, I'm a Kennedy. This is what we do. We run for office and we represent those who cannot represent themselves.
Wow. And
And
you're
that's all
5
I
years
wanted.
old?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's all I want to do for you,
Wow.
is to represent you and to be your voice here. And I lost. And I remember telling the teacher, but we don't lose elections. And telling my mother, but we don't lose elections. But I did, because I wasn't as popular. But I guess I've been a Democrat since birth. I am idealistic, I guess, to a point. I consider myself progressive, even though progressive is a relatively new term.
Yes.
Although Teddy Roosevelt was a progressive, and the first progressive, arguably, in this country. I am a progressive, and I don't think progressivism is a dirty word. I don't think progressivism fell from the sky. I don't think there's, didn't come from Mars. It didn't come from the Andromeda galaxy. We've always been progressive in this country. The Democratic Party is a progressive party. It's the Clinton era that took it into a more corporate party. I think the Clinton wing of the party is what Republicans used to be in the Eisenhower era.
Mm-hmm.
And I miss the times in this country where Republicans and Democrats agreed on where we wanted to end up. We just didn't always agree on how we wanted to get there.
Yes, yes.
And we're the only functioning political party left. And it seems to me that, as I said, our answers are all in our history. And it's only, I have this argument with, it's not always an argument. Sometimes it's an impassioned discussion with activists. Activists hold a very, very important role in our society. They are the ones that bring attention to issues. Sometimes issues that don't get enough attention, sometimes issues that do get attention, but that folks are not educated enough about. The Black Lives Matter movement after the murder of George Floyd was integral to this country. But it is government and politics that put those answers into practice. And that's where the activism and the politics need to start to work together. Yeah. Activists want to just march in the street and yell and scream and say nobody cares about us. Bull, we do. It's politics where the issues get solved. And these solutions are in our history. And that's why I mentioned earlier that President Kennedy, although he had Republicans oh dear God, they love to talk about how he cut taxes. Yeah, the top marginal rate from 91 to 74%. That top marginal rate now, I think, is 37.4. if I'm not mistaken. I might be off there. Even Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are only talking about, and Elizabeth Warren are only talking about raising it back to 50. No, folks, it should be 93%, where it was in our history. It should be 93%. We didn't have a student debt problem in this country before Reagan. He did that and said on camera, "Why are you running for president?" "Because I'm going to destroy what's left of the New Deal." And said it straight into a camera.
Yes.
And we bought it as a country. And 40 plus years later, we're still suffering with it.
Yeah.
I tell the story about the history. It's not a story. There are many in an empire and a history so long. There are many reasons why the Roman Empire fell. But one of those reasons is because the rich people didn't feel like paying for the armies anymore. They had their own trickle down. Let the people pay. Raise the taxes on the people. All the rich people won't pay any. And the empire fell. And we're seeing the fall of the American empire. Troops in 184 countries, 800 plus military bases, a $1.4 trillion military budget. Once you take in all the ancillary costs, not just the 800 billion that we seem to spend every year, but everything connected to it, it's more like 1.4 trillion. $500 billion of giveaways to the fossil fuel industry. We know what to do with these things. We know. The New Deal worked. That's why the rich hated it, because it worked. We had a Democratic Socialist as a president in this country. He got elected 4 times. And Republicans had to change the Constitution to make sure it never happened again. We know how to fix these things. We do. We just have to. Every week I talk about the 100 people in the room, the 1% and the 99%, the 1 and the 99. Mr. Bezos and Mr. Musk and Peter Thiel and the Kochs, they can spend billions and billions and billions of dollars to try to convince us that the richer they get, the better it is for all of us. Even Republicans will tell you at about a 63% clip that the rich need to pay more. They know better. And at the end of the day, after the Kochs spend all that money and Peter Thiel spends all that money and the Mercers, and I could go on and on and on, they still only have 1 vote. So when the 99 of us go into that voting booth and vote in our own self-interest, that becomes the greater good. These are New Deal, progressive Kennedy principles. We didn't put a man on the moon because it was cost effective. We did it because that's what Americans do. He didn't create the Peace Corps because it made a profit. It's because that's what Americans do. We're watching the Chinese do it now. They're bringing solar electricity and water all across Africa while they extract all the lithium and gold and oil and other things. They're taking a continent without ever firing a shot. We always fire the shot first. President Kennedy was going to get us out of Vietnam. It's very well documented. Eisenhower hated Kennedy.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
He hated him. But one of the only conversations that they did, they talked during the Bay of Pigs, they talked during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and they talked about Vietnam. And Eisenhower said, "Look, you have to get out. It was my mistake. I never should have started it. You got to get out of there." And he was going to. And these are the things that power me and push a really long-winded answer, but these are the things that power me and push me. When I watch that documentary, I see me. And God knows, and I'm going to ask you this question at some point. I was trying to save it for last. I hope I don't forget. I'm no Bobby Kennedy, God knows. I'm no Jack Kennedy, God knows. I'm no Teddy Kennedy, God knows. Not even close. But they were right. And more so than being right, they were correct. These policies work. I think even more so than President Kennedy, it's what Bobby Kennedy brought to the table. That mirror is so powerful. That can we look ourselves in the mirror and say, my neighbor is starving, and somehow I'm good with that? That 3 people have as much wealth as the bottom 100 60%. So what, 160? No, it's more than 160 now. It's 330 million people. What about 170 million, 180 million people in the country? We're okay with that? That the 8 richest people have as much wealth as the bottom 4 billion people? We're okay with that? We're paying $4 a gallon at the, well, not anymore, but we were at one point paying 4, 5. If you're in California, 6, 7, and $8 a gallon for gas, when we're giving the fossil fuel industry $500 billion and 5 trillion worldwide, and they're recording his solar system historically high profits. We know better. We know something's not right. We just have to have the courage to do something about it. It seems to me that as we look back on President Kennedy's campaign and Bobby's campaign, we know what's wrong. We know how to fix it. We just have to. Yes, some rich people are not going to be happy. The military-industrial complex is not going to be happy. But the 99% of the country is, and there's more of them. And that's kind of what fuels me. I love politics. I love speaking. I love public speaking. When I ran for office, one of the things I always had over my opponent is they would sweat, puke, choke on their words in a public speech. 10 people they could get away with. 50 they get nervous and start to sweat, didn't want to give a speech and all. Don't give me 50, give me 50,000.
Yeah.
A speech is a speech is a speech is a speech. It's why don't you get nervous when you go on radio and the TV? No. Because we're just talking to each other. And these are the speeches that we need to be making. We need to be looking, especially in the red districts. We need to be looking our fellow Americans and residents of the country, not just American citizens, but everybody who lives here, and say, you're wrong. You're wrong.
You and I
It's
spoke
not
on
good
the
for you.
phone, yeah, about the Robert Kennedy speeches, of which there are many that are magnificent. But my favorite was one he gave in Detroit in May of 1967. And it was called The Measure of a Nation. That's where he said, the gross domestic product measures everything that doesn't matter, and it tells you nothing about the quality of our lives. What a magnificent speech that was. And then he turned it into an op-ed in the New York Times that still exists. And to me, that was, of all his speeches, the one I thought was the most insightful.
No, someone was just on MSNBC talking about this week, and I'm going to get the name of it wrong, and you're going to correct me, I hope. I believe it's called the comfort quotient. It's what Americans can afford to sustain themselves.
Mm.
As we mentioned when we talked on the phone, 40% of Americans cannot absorb a $400 emergency.
Yes.
60% of Americans cannot absorb $1,000 emergency. 60% of Americans have no more than $1,000 in their savings accounts. I think it's called the comfort quotient. Can I afford food, housing, education, medical, and still have a little bit left over? The percentage of Americans who cannot is higher than it was before the Republican Great Depression.
Yeah.
While 3 people are worth on and on and on. In fact, those 3 people, I've said this in the program too, the combined wealth of Mr. Bezos, Mr. Musk, and Mr. Zuckerberg are more than, I think it's the bottom 2/3 of the gross domestic products of the nations on Earth.
Amazing.
The gross domestic product of Haiti, I think, is only like $100 million or something. It's the poorest nation on Earth. The bottom, that list of GDPs from 1 down to 220 something recognized nations by the United Nations. That bottom 2/3, they're worth more than the gross domestic products of nations. It's not right. It's not moral. It's not just not Christian. It's not insert faith here.
Yes.
It's any of them.
We used to use the expression people living paycheck to paycheck. Today, people living credit card to credit card.
Yeah.
On their paycheck. They're deep into debt, and they're paying huge interest rates on that debt. And no one's talking about that. When you think about it,
30, 40%.
Yeah.
We talk a lot about mortgage interest rates. I mean, the last Republican to talk about home ownership was, of all the people in the world, George W. Bush,
Mm.
about how important and basic it was to an American economy that, every dollar you spend on your home ripples through the returns seven back
Yep.
to the economy, because you hire carpenters and drywalls, you buy appliances, and you buy a lawnmower for your front lawn, and so on and so on and so on. He went about it all the wrong way, but at least he knew that home ownership was a bedrock of an American economy. But they don't even care about that anymore. All
No.
of the redevelopment that's happening in the Lehigh Valley, nearly all of it, is rent. It's rent, 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 and that rent is set just high enough
Mm.
that you can never afford to save anything for a mortgage. Now, if you choose to rent, it's the United States. Go for it. You don't want any responsibility. Every time this faucet leaks, you want to be able to call somebody. Brilliant. Awesome. If that works for you, that's your choice. It's America. But if you ever really wanted to have a home, you can't rent. Why are people living with their parents up into their 30s? Because they can't afford to do anything else. We're not this isn't a first world nation anymore in many, many ways. As you well know, that the United States was the largest importer of raw materials and exporter of finished goods before Reagan took office.
Mm.
In 8 short years in his 2 terms, that completely flipped. We became the largest importer of finished goods, exporter of raw materials. We used to be the largest creditor nation. We became the largest debtor nation. We had the largest middle class on earth. We now have, among the OECD first world nations, among the smallest. In fact, I wanted to ask you earlier, when we were talking about, economic justice and economic equality, Republicans love to talk about how we're Americans and we do not want to be more European.
Yes. Yes.
The Western European social democracies got their economies from us after the war, when there were no functioning governments. The Truman administration wrote the German Constitution, which puts union representation on corporate boards if they have a certain number of employees. How have we lost this sense of self? When did the wealth doctrine become the preeminent faith in this country?
There's a phrase I've always had a problem with that conservatives love to bandy about: American exceptionalism. And yeah, we're exceptional.
We're exceptional at the death of women of color giving
Yeah.
birth, at
We're
the
the
at 1 in
outliers.
6 children in hunger. We're exceptional at some things.
Yep, exactly.
Nothing good. We're the largest exporter of military goods and weapons in the country, on the planet. Is that again, to borrow from Bobby Kennedy? Is that who we are?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, some folks would say that that's who we've always been. Is it though? Is that, you've seen this country over a lot of different eras? A New Deal era, the Vietnam era, the Reagan era. Who are we? Are we the 1960s, 50s, and 60s America, or are we Reagan's America, or are we both? In your opinion?
Well, I think we're a little bit of both. I think there are some things we've done that you wonder if we've learned anything from history. On the other hand, I mean, we've made some progress toward making healthcare more affordable. We have a long way to go, which we're probably going about it in a way that's never going to achieve that objective. Some people like to point out that our definition of poverty in the United States would be middle class anywhere else. I don't buy that. I mean, I think
I
that's
don't either.
trying to sugarcoat. And then, now we're having this backlash against diversity and affirmative action. And boy, another one of those things, Robert Kennedy, when people would say, blacks are getting too much, you know what he would come back and say? Do you wish you had been born black? That would shut them up immediately, because nobody would say, yeah, blacks have it so good, I wish I were black. Nobody would say that, right? Or he would often say, suppose God is black. He had a way with asking people what we used to call sweat questions, right? Suppose God is black. Yeah. You could feel in the audience.
Well, it's like the medieval and Renaissance art of Christ. He was not Swedish. I'm
right.
pretty sure he was not Swedish.
I don't think he had blue eyes.
No, I don't think he did. What is your feeling on? You haven't told me that you have to leave yet, and my questions are going to sound like we're wrapping up. But I honestly, in all honesty, I just don't want to forget them.
What are your thoughts on Robert? Till about another 8? Until 8 o'clock. Yeah.
Okay, good. Good. Oh well, then I'm. Oh god.
But you made the time for me.
Holy crap! I planned this right. Whoa!
I hope the
Out
time
for
is
more snow.
gone as fast for you and your audience as it is for me. It's really
Look, I tell you this in all honesty, I have never had one single guest, not one. My producer and my friend of 2 decades is the white square there, George. We have not had one guest. They all say we'll do 10 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever. 2 hours later, like, what? How long?
Good for you. Good for you.
So not one has ever said, this is just go, I got to get out of here. I can't stand this. This is going too long.
No, this
They
is
all
good.
stay longer than they say, and they all are like, whoa, wait, how long? Anyway, your thoughts about Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s presidential campaign and the family has roundly disavowed him, his points of view. He's getting traction, I think, because he's getting billionaire money trying to spoil the election, but he's also Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on his campaign?
He's my friend. I'm a loyal person. I would never attack him publicly. Am I supporting him? Absolutely not. But I don't have any negative to say. Of all the kids, he reminds me most of his father. He has that fierce, no nonsense approach about him, and he has his father's expressions more than the other kids. But I just think on this one, I just don't know what to make of it. So
it seems misplaced and mistimed to me.
Yeah, I mean, I remember talking to him years ago about running for governor. I thought he'd be great. I'm a New Yorker. I wanted to run for governor. He said, Bill, I have 6 kids. I know what it's like to be without a father. I'd never do that to my kids. But now I guess the kids are all grown. But never discussed the campaign with him. He never reached out to those of us who worked for his father to ask us what we thought. This was an impulsive thing. And I just wish him safety. That's my biggest concern.
I felt the same way about Joe the Third's run against Ed Markey, primary against Ed Markey. It was misplaced.
Now that one
and unnecessary and mistimed from my point of view.
Yeah, that I helped Joe. I thought the world of Joe, and I said, "Look, the calculation is questionable, but if you're going to do it, I'm with you." So I went all out to help him, and you learn a lot about things. And Markey was a good man. In fact, we did the premiere of the Bobby Kennedy movie in Washington, and Ed Markey introduced us all as, and he started by saying he's my hero, Robert Kennedy. So
and he was lifelong friends with Ted. So
yeah,
I thought the primary was misplaced. Are there any Bobby Kennedys out there now?
If there are, I don't know. The governor of Kentucky, Brashear, I find him appealing in a way, but he's very low-keyed. And maybe it's because of my connection to Kentucky, what it meant to Robert Kennedy. But I have to see more of him. But no, unfortunately, I can't say there's anyone out there that has that same appeal. Maybe that's the wrong question to ask, is that you're looking for someone like him. Maybe that's just, that bar is too high. But, President Biden has Robert Kennedy's bust in his office. I have Robert Kennedy's bust in my office. I hope he uses it the way I do, which is a source of constant inspiration. But without taking anything away from him, because I agree with you, on the record, he's had quite a first term. He just doesn't connect the way, Robert Kennedy did.
I will take that criticism. Perhaps it is an unfair question, but at the risk of being repetitive, maybe I'll try to rephrase, Counselor. Your Honor, I'll rephrase. Is there anybody that seems to be carrying that energy or that idealism, or that maybe even on occasion you kind of hear just a little bit of that? Maybe it's Senator Sanders is to his own admission, and he doesn't have to admit it. He's an old man. He's an older gentleman. But that sort of idealism, does an Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez remind you of a Gavin Newsom? Do you hear the echoes anywhere in from anybody in modern politics? If not, I will agree. Maybe that's an unfair question because the bar is impossible.
I'll accept that challenge. I'll start with the negative. I don't think either Ocasio or Newsom. Newsom, by the way, can recite Robert Kennedy's speeches. He was his hero. But I'll put 2 people who are on my radar screen for 2028. One is the Democratic Minority Leader, Hakeem Jeffries. I am biased. I'm a New Yorker. I'm a Bronx guy. He's a Brooklyn guy, but I think keep an eye on him. And the governor of Maryland, Wes Moore, keep an
Yeah.
eye on him. He grew up in the Bronx, which again, you can see how I have geographical biases. I would say keep an eye on both of them. I think they've got the makings of magnificent leaders. But right now, they still have a lot. They still have more work to do, I think.
Again, I know this is maybe an unfair or risky question. January 6th, 2021, you're at dinner with Bobby Kennedy. What does he say to you? Or do we even have a Trump if Bobby Kennedy had been president?
It's so hard to even try. When I try to do that, his children tell me, "Please, Bill, don't want to be one of those that if he had lived, here's what he would have done." No one knows, and you really don't. I got to feel he would have been horrified. Knowing Robert Kennedy probably would have said, "Let's go over there and meet him and take him on." Who knows, right? It's time to go to the barricades. Who knows?
Is it unfair though? Isn't that kind of one of the things that history can possibly teach us? We there are theological scholars who continue to read, interpret, reinterpret the reinterpretations. I'm reminded of Mary Magdalene's place in the Bible. She was a prostitute. Well, no, it turns out she really wasn't any of those things. She was simply a woman, and we needed to make sure that we degraded women, or put them back in their place in biblical times. Isn't history or the potential interpretations of history part of that lesson? Isn't it important to us so that perhaps we don't repeat these errors? To say, the fictional novels, Man in the High Castle or something like that. If we had lost World War II, what if? If the Brits had surrendered, but the United States was then isolated, and if we had never entered the war, et cetera, et cetera. If President Kennedy had not been assassinated, if Martin Luther King had not been assassinated, Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, Senator Bobby Kennedy, aren't those important things to try to maybe speculate about where we would be? Would there have been a
Yes.
Ronald Reagan? Would the Vietnam War have been shut down? Would we have returned taxes high? Would we be a greener economy? We talk about if Al Gore had actually been president the way he was elected to be, where we would be environmentally right now. Aren't those kind of important speculative
Oh, yeah, I
questions?
think those are legitimate questions from a policy perspective. What I don't like is to try to think if Robert Kennedy had been here on that date, how he would have reacted to that incident. That's just impossible. But the policies that he's on record supporting, those policies are still very relevant to today. So, yeah, that I think we can do. But there are some issues that just were not on the radar screen back in 1967, 1968. That it's hard to say, okay, knowing everything I know about him, I can project where I think he'd be on this issue. That I just feel uncomfortable trying to do that.
When you see friends and folks that you stay in touch with from those days, is that the automatic place where the conversation goes?
Yeah, it often is. Yeah. In fact, one of them, Jeff Greenfield, actually wrote a book about if Robert Kennedy had lived, what would his administration have been like? And it was very uncomfortable to read it. So, yeah, we just kind of stay away from that.
Is it because it's sad, or because is it just too hard still? Even after all these years, is it still very fresh?
For me, it's too hard. It's definitely too hard. For others, they've gotten over it, but very few of us left. I mean, the numbers. Look at the movie of those of us in the movie.
Yeah.
Harry Belafonte is gone. John Lewis is gone. Very few of us. Bill Vandenheuvel was my mentor, is gone. Ted Sorensen is gone.
Yeah.
Very few of us left. So we're a shrinking group. I'm trying to make the most of those memories in a positive way.
I do hope somehow I can get a hold of Miss Huertas. I'd love to have her here to talk about the farmers movement and the connection to Bobby and that connection, so on. 2 more minutes before you leave us.
Yes.
Please let me just give you what I do traditionally with every guest,
Yes.
especially new guests, and that is, I have some bad news for you, sir. As you are part of our family now. And
I'm
that
honored, Jeff. I am honored.
it is my deep, deep, deep and most sincere hope that this is not the only time that we visit you, or that you come to visit with us, that the door is always open to you.
Thank
I
you.
told you on the phone, I have told people on this program before, you've done more for our program than I can give to you. We are not Tom Hartman. We're not Stephanie Miller. We're not MSNBC. We're not C-SPAN for that matter. We don't cover that kind of ground, but we just try to talk about the truth in history here. You are always, always, always welcome here, and you are part of the family.
Thank
If
you so much.
anything that we didn't get to touch on, anything we didn't get to quite finish out, I just want to give you the floor to whatever before you, or to fill in the blanks or
Well,
anything we
yeah, let
missed.
me make one other point because we have an internship program at the academy, and it's usually undergraduate college students. And I often tell them what I was doing at their age, and they hate when we boomers say that when I was your age. But I want young people to know that even at that stage in life, look at what I was doing, and you can do the same thing. Find a cause, find a person, find a vehicle, but don't be a passive person. Get involved in something. We all have something we care about. You got to do more than just care about it. You got to do something about it. So at 19, I was putting words in the mouth of a presidential candidate. I mean, imagine that at 19, right? You can do that. So that's one message I would like to leave to younger people, especially Generation Z. They're a very angry generation for good reason, and they got to accept the challenge of getting involved. And I just hope that they do that because the future generations are the ones that will make the difference in our country. We boomers have had our chance. I guess you're Generation X. Um, I think
Oh,
we've
I
had our
don't.
chance.
Geez, I gotta be honest. I don't even know.
Yeah,
I
I
think
think
I
we.
am, but I don't even know.
Yeah, I think
I,
it's up.
you
It's
know
up
what? I
to.
am tired. That's what I am. I'm tired. My body hurts. If I was in Europe, my best friend again is English. I started having all these physical problems and health problems. He told me, if you, I said, I can't help but think if I lived in Europe, I wouldn't have to work anymore. He goes, you don't have to worry about it. You would.
Yeah,
He goes, you're done. You weren't working for 30. Well, at that point, it would have been like 30 something years. He goes, you've done your bit for king and country
yeah,
and you'd be taken care of. And we just don't do that here. It seems to me that our public has become only one of, we have two criterion. And then we turn into what, when Alan Grayson made his speech on the House floor,
yes.
if we can either generate wealth for the billionaires or we have wealth they can extract from us. And when those two things go away, die quickly.
Interesting. On
But
that note,
yeah, geez,
thank
a real
you,
positive.
Jeff. Well, thank
I
you for the
am
opportunity.
so deeply honored that you came here. Again, it's the National Academy of Social Insurance, NASI.org. William Arnone. I don't have enough thanks to say thank you.
Thank
And
you.
please come back and see us again, especially in this
Okay.
most important election year. I hope that you will visit us again.
Okay. Good night.
Thank you so much.
Bye bye.
That is William Arnone. I am really high on that one. Oh, that was a good one. Wow. If you were with us when Representative Walsh was here, I was so nervous and so excited. This was very much the same thing. Not the same kind of nerves because I had a chance to speak to Mr. Arnone Friday night, I think it was. So we could kind of talk about what we were going to talk about. And again, he said he'd probably stay for about 20 minutes, and here we are 2 hours in. And I know that for a good number of you, this is ancient history. If you're 20, 25, 30, Bobby was assassinated, what, 2028 will make it 40, 60 years ago. We'll make it 60 years. It's ancient history to you. Except that, and we just celebrated actually the 60th anniversary of President Kennedy's assassination in 2023. And in a lot of ways, it is history. It is somewhat ancient history. When we think about World War II veterans, there's only literally a handful of them left all around the globe. Some of them are in their late 90s and 100. But that doesn't remove the history. That doesn't change the fact that the war took place. It doesn't change the fact that President Kennedy was assassinated for what most scholars now accept very untawdry reasons. And that Senator Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, was assassinated for some of those very same reasons. Because he wanted a just society. We're going to tax rich people. He wanted to demilitarize this country. He wanted peace, not war. He wanted to treat Black folk, Hispanic folk, Asian folk, white folk the same, and that they were murdered for those reasons. And those 5 assassinations of the 60s, the decade of assassination, Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, Dr. King, Bobby Kennedy, and President Kennedy, not in that order, obviously. We've never been the same. We've never recovered as a country. I would even go so far as to say the planet has not recovered from it. We've never recovered. We are not the same. We lost innocence. We lost optimism. We lost opportunity. And we haven't been the same. We haven't recovered. I am so I'm really thrilled with this one. I'll tell you what, Kristen will tell you, George will tell you, Sergeant Mac would tell you, April would tell you, I don't pat myself on the back for this program. I don't turn off this, I don't stop the broadcast at 9 o'clock or whenever it is that we stop and look myself in the mirror and go, you are just awesome. You're the best. And I'm not going to do it tonight either. But sometimes I put out a program and just think to myself, now that was special. That was just damn good radio and video, and it was informative, and it was everything I could have hoped. And that was it. Let me open up the phone. Let me do this. It's 8:06. We've entered our final hour. I'm nearly certain that Sergeant Mac is coming up after us. I'm pretty darn sure. I'm texting him right now. I'm pretty darn sure he's on it. He's on tonight. The Villain's View at 9 o'clock. That other side of information, hot101.net. I actually really should put it on I should probably put it on my YouTube too, but I don't know how to do that in real time. That said, wherever you are on Facebook, and I think we shared to should actually finish sharing the program to all the places that I didn't share it before. Sergeant Mac tells me he is live tonight. They're doing what they call a Seinfeld episode, which I think is hilarious, which is basically just a show about nothing. I think they just kind of sort of throw the mics open, and then where the conversation takes them is where it takes them. And I think that's pretty darn cool. And so they will be live tonight, 9 Eastern time, hot101.net, and that other side of information. I'm finishing where I didn't get to share to before. I think I may have doubled up on a couple of groups. Probably should do that. Did it by mistake. But that said, that was that was big time. That really felt I was happy about that. Really, really happy about that. I'm gonna be a little too proud of myself for the rest of the program. That was big time. I was really big time. I am going to, okay, so I need to reset. My head's all gone, and I'm trying to monitor things, and I'm losing myself, and I shouldn't be doing it. Third hour, the Kennedy Effect. Sergeant Mac, the Villain's View, comes up at 9 p.m. Oh my God. I can't stand it. I can't type. I'm trying to do it. Wherever you are on Facebook, we've shared the program to about 105 different places now, to every single group, large and small, public and private, to every page, local, regional, global. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. We couldn't do it without you. If you have missed any of our program, youtube.com. We're live there now. But when the feed ends, the recording stays right there. It is the best and probably easiest place to catch up on the program if you missed it. And boy, if you missed any of this program, you really, really, really want to go back and watch it. I'm so proud of the 2 hours that we did. I'm so very proud of it. Really, really proud of it. Please check it out. If you missed any of it, youtube.com/that other side of information, and check it out. Wherever you are on Facebook, that other side of information is also our home group Facebook page. We are live right now. Best place to ask your questions, comments, etc. is at my own timeline, Jeff Kennedy. That's where I see them. I will take your questions. I'll take your comments. We'll take you as deep into the hour as I possibly can. Hot101.net. Our name is our George already changed it because he's reading my mind and he knows where I'm going next. That said, if you can connect to the internet anywhere on or above planet Earth, you can listen to hot101.net 24/7. And we do have listeners around the globe. Again, I mentioned last week, I kind of did a recalculation of the number of people that this program, this humble Kennedy Effect program, reaches every week. It's about 500,000 now. When I started, it was maybe 10,000. It's now about 500,000 people, and a good chunk of them are at hot101.net. So if you can get on the internet, you can listen. Our name is our web address, but you don't need the main website. You can use the apps, Apple App Store, Google Play Store, and the TuneIn Radio app. Apple and Google apps, you tap it, it opens, you're listening. No login, no registration, no blood sample. Don't have to pay, don't have to sign over your firstborn, secondborn, trade, barter, livestock, pay a dowry, none of that stuff. You tap on it, it opens, you listen, and you should be. The DJs on hot101.net are extremely talented. They're good people, and you should be listening. We are here each Sunday. The Villain's View follows us. It is music the rest of the time. You should be listening. Hot101.net. And of course, TCP, the TCP Media Group from Lancaster, PA. I hope that audience enjoyed what we did too. So let me and a special welcome to Alan in the chat, who says he's a first-time listener. Thank you, Alan, for listening and giving us a chance. We hope you become a regular. And please know that the same place that you're commenting right now is exactly where you can place questions, comments, agree with me, disagree, yell, scream, tell me I'm awesome, tell me I suck, whatever it might be, put it in there. We'll talk about it. So that covers that. Let me change my little screen quickly here. Phone number is on the screen. I should not have to change my name actually to it. The number is on the screen. George has it there. It's in the upper right-hand corner. I should stop doing this, actually. I just realized I really should stop doing this. 267-227. But our phone number, our line is open, 267-227-9189, 267-227-9189, 267-227-9189. Tell us what you thought about that 2 hours. If you've watched the documentary, tell us what you thought about it. Talk to us about anything that happened this past week. Right before we came on the air, Ron DeSantis dropped out of the Republican primary, and I'm going to tell you one reason why I believe that he did. Well, there's 2 reasons. He was never going to win. The more he campaigned, the less popular he became. The numbers show that the more he campaigned, the less popular he became. He actually turned people off. His poll numbers dropped the more he campaigned. So there's that. But the other reason that I believe he's walking away is he's got $150 million in campaign funds. Since Citizens United and changing in the campaign finance laws, he gets to keep that money. He can keep it in a PAC. If he never runs for office again, he gets to just keep the money. He's $150 million richer for accomplishing absolutely nothing. That's what our politics have become. So I think he got out for a couple of reasons. He knew he had no chance to win. And I might as well get out while I still have a good chunk of change left. Now, he's burnt through several $100 million. He was blowing everybody away in financing. And remember, Trump really doesn't raise all that kind of money because he gets so much free media and he makes such a spectacle of himself. And a lot of the money that's donated to him, he spends on his own legal defense. He doesn't even spend it on campaign expenditures. So the only one left is Nikki Haley. And I think the only reason she's sticking around is just in case Trump actually ends up in jail or dies, because he's not a healthy man. And if you've been listening to him on the campaign trail, he is constantly having these mental gaffes that he's very, very happy to talk about President Biden about. As he blamed Nikki Haley for not having enough security at the Capitol on January 6th. He thought she was Nancy Pelosi and proceeded to continue to confuse the two of them for many, many, many minutes into his speech. He ain't all there, folks. When you do nothing but drink Diet Coke and eat McDonald's 10 times a day, it's going to have an effect on you. He's also morbidly obese. I'm not sure how he made it this long. That said, we can talk about that. We can talk about the interview. We can talk about anything that you want. 267-227-9189, 267-227-9189. I also want to tell you that it is my plan currently to not be with you next week because of the NFL. We'll come back for the week in between the championship games and the Super Bowl. We will not be with you again for the Super Bowl because, let's just face it, 2/3 of the country's watching it. I don't expect there'll be much of an audience. And then the week after the Super Bowl, we'll be off and running again until Easter, or at least that would be the plan. So the plan is next week, the 28th, we will not be with you. We will come back on February 4th, off again on the 11th, and then from February 18 until March 24th, we'll have a straight run of shows. The 31st of March is actually Easter Sunday. So we'll have a straight run of shows. You know, it's really strange to think about, but we're closer to spring than not. I mean, we're almost through. We're in the back half of January already. It's really crazy to think about. There's only, about 10 days left in January. It's crazy. It's really amazing where the time goes. In lieu of phone calls, since there doesn't seem to be any at the moment, let me do what I usually do. Let's go through our Facebook group to see what we have been posting and talk about some of the stories that we were talking about during the week. From 23 hours ago, from CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting, President Zelensky has challenged the ex-president to live up to his bold words. Trump has said that if he becomes president again, he can end the Ukrainian war in 24 hours. Zelensky said, if you can end it in 24 hours, come on over and do it. I challenge you to come over here and bring peace to Ukraine and Russia. Trump, of course, cannot end the war that quickly. He will hope to end the war by completely abandoning Ukraine to Russia. Remember when Republicans were the law and order party of a strong national defense, the anti-communist, anti-fascist party? They are now the fascist party. They are now willing to allow Russia to absorb Ukraine. And if Russia should absorb Ukraine, you think the Russians are suddenly going, or you think the Republicans are suddenly going to stop them from taking Estonia, Latvia, I'm forgetting the third Baltic country. Here's the difference. They're willing to let Ukraine go because Ukraine is not a full NATO member. They are only under consideration for membership. So Article 5 of the NATO treaty, which means an attack on one is an attack on all, does not apply. The Baltic nations are NATO countries. Poland is a NATO country. Sweden and Finland, especially Finland, which shares a very long border with Russia, is now a NATO country. If the Russians take Ukraine, they will take the Baltic nations next. And that means we're a full-scale war in Europe because then NATO must reply. That means the United States. But if Trump is in office, would he reply, or would he pull the United States out of NATO entirely and leave Europe to its own devices? NATO is significantly stronger now that Finland and Sweden are a part of it. I would argue it's more stable. I would argue it's more Trump-proof because it now contains Sweden and Finland. A brilliant job by President Zelensky to say, fine, you can end this war. Come on over and end it. We want peace, so come on, end it. Fantastic. What a brilliant job. A really interesting video that I posted earlier this week from the House Judiciary Committee, the Democrats on the House Judiciary Committee, took a video from Steve Ratner from Morning Joe, who is while he has served in Democratic administrations, is no progressive, I guarantee you, about how the U.S. economy has rebounded from COVID, how it has rebounded from inflation without dipping into recession the way everyone expected it to do. The job numbers for December beat expectations. Interest rates are starting to fall. Even though the Fed has not moved, interest rates are falling. Mortgage interest rates are actually starting to drip. Drip? Let me try that again. Starting to dip. Even though the Fed has not changed the prime rate. Of course, credit card interest never changes. If progressives really wanted to accomplish something, they'd do something about that. But how the U.S. economy continues to defy expectations. Job growth for an economy and the number of available workers the size of the United States, we are essentially at full employment. About 3.2, I think, is the unemployment rate. For all intent and purpose, it might as well be 100%. There will always be unemployed people. There will be people who choose not to work. And oh, by the way, if you believe in freedom, well, then okay. But that said, we are statistically at full employment. We have not had a recession, even with the corporate gouging inflation that we saw. And again, it's not inflation when you're recording record high profits, globally, historically, globally high profits. It's not inflation when Exxon is recording $50+ billion in net profits in a year. Or when Apple becomes a $1 trillion company. Microsoft, a $1 trillion company. That's not inflation, it's extortion, it's extraction. Alan, our first-time listener that I congratulated earlier, said the House needs to approve support. I assume he means for Ukraine. You're not kidding. Even Senate Republicans are telling House Republicans to shut up and pass the bill. The administration is giving Republicans everything they could ask for about the border. The administration is prioritizing aid for Israel, Taiwan, and Ukraine over Republican demands, irrational Republican demands at the border. And still, the House Republicans don't want to pass it. They're getting what they want. And Senate Republicans are telling them to shut up and vote. You have to wonder in between, inside these quiet walls and caucus meetings with Republicans, when they're finally going to say, you know what, enough is enough. Stop with this crap. Except they probably, maybe in quiet places they do it. Publicly they won't, because they're all owned by the same billionaires. And the only side that the billionaires are on is their own. I've talked about this in the program before, and I hope I'm not going off on too far of a tangent. The Koch brothers never gave a flying you know what whether gay people got married or not. They didn't care. They said that in the press. They didn't care. Trump never cared. He didn't care about abortion. He didn't care about any of that stuff. Trump traditionally was a very socially liberal person. Sure as hell lived his life like that. The Kochs didn't care about any of that stuff. But they knew that it made people come out and vote for the candidates that they were bankrolling. The candidates that would cut corporate taxes, cut regulations, destroy the EPA, destroy public education, cut taxes on the wealthy. The Kochs never gave a crap about abortion, or gay marriage, or trans kids that want to run track or play tennis. They didn't care about any of that. They just wanted tax cuts. They want the EPA dismantled. Care about any of that. So they used those issues to bring people out to vote for candidates that they would not normally vote for. Again, 63% of Republicans think the rich need to pay more in taxes. Even more than that, support a wealth tax. So what do we do to take people off of that issue? We talk about abortion and trans kids and book burning. Randall mentions 45 is telling the House to shut down the government. Of course he is. He's running against a successful president. Randall's 100% right. That's the strategy. But Republicans in the Senate are saying, we don't care about that. We're getting everything we want on the border, and Ukraine needs the money. You have Republicans in the Senate that support aid for Ukraine. There's still some national defense Republicans left. Randall's right. House Republicans are stopping this because they think they're helping Trump. But what they are also doing is that the Republicans are no longer the party of law and order. They're no longer the party of a strong national defense. They're no longer the freedom, anti-communist, anti-fascist party. They are the fascist party. They don't care if Russia rolls across Europe. As long as their pockets are laced with billionaire money, they don't care what happens about anything. Environment, education, race wars, they don't care. It's French. It's the French Revolution. The people versus the bourgeoisie. If I used the right term, I think I did. Kristen will correct me at some point later if I didn't. As she should. That's what it is. Their pockets are jammed full of money. They don't care about anything else. This is not a functioning political party. What else did we see? Oh, the Supreme Court this week, I posted a video from Tom Hartman. It's not even that long either. I think it's only about 3.5 minutes. The Supreme Court heard a case this week where these Koch-funded entities have sued the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, stating that the EPA does not have the jurisdiction to regulate how much arsenic is in the water, how much carbon monoxide is in the air. And the theory that they're using to do this is that the original legislation that establishes the EPA does not specifically say that the EPA can regulate these things. What this would mean is that if Congress had to pass an EPA establishing piece of legislation today, that piece of legislation would have to specifically outline all of the chemicals and additives and just all of it that the EPA can regulate, and that if it did not mention a certain additive, chemical, etc., then the EPA would not be allowed to regulate it. And not only that, but that the legislation would have to specifically say only 2 parts per billion arsenic can be in the water. And that the EPA would not be allowed to actually establish those limits unless Congress specifically passed a piece of legislation that says exactly how much of X can be in the water, air, food, etc. Now, this was never an argument of Republicans when the Department of Homeland Security was established, but now they want it. Now let me get yelled at. Here's Randall. Are you okay there at the house? Or are you floating away?
I got a plumber out and things for taking.
It's already fixed?
Yeah,
That was quick. The whole thing happened just during the time of the show. That's crazy.
it happened at the start of your show.
So in 2.5 hours, you had a burst pipe. Somebody came out and fixed it. That's pretty awesome, to be honest with you.
Well, that's because it was discovered very quickly.
Not
And
good.
everything was isolated, and the main water was turned off to the house. And yeah, it was.
Well,
we were
that's
lucky.
awesome. I'm glad you got everything taken care of. That's usually things don't happen that fast, that quick. Well,
Yep.
glad everybody's okay though, right?
Okay, and I'll have to go back and listen to the show because obviously I missed it with your guest. I will do that obviously tonight later after the Villains View because I will participate in the Villains View like I always do every week. Anyway, get back to your last this Supreme Court decision that they will make in June. That if they rule that it's not just the EPA, it's all federal agencies. That could be the FCC, that could be the FAA, that could be anyway, FAA, for example. They put new regulations up year by year when we have accidents to prevent future same type of accidents.
Right.
They're not going to be able to do that if the Supreme Court rules in favor of the Republicans that have taken this specific case,
Right.
to the court system,
Which is a Koch-funded case because the plaintiffs could never afford this kind of thing on their own. The Kochs are bankrolling all of this. And you're right. This particular case has to do with the EPA, but Randall's 100% correct. If the Supreme Court should rule that against the EPA, then that pretty much destroys every regulatory agency. It could be National Highway Safety Administration, could be the ATF. Tell me Republicans wouldn't want to drastically curtail the ATF. Securities and Exchange Commission. It'll be it already pretty much is a free-for-all on Wall Street, but whatever regulations are left will be gone. Randall's 100% correct. This particular case does specify on the EPA, but if the Supreme Court rules against the EPA here, it is regulations in this country would be essentially dead on everything.
and that includes the Food and Drug Administration.
Correct. Oh, yes. Thank you for mentioning that. You're 100% right. Oh, beef kills you? Yeah, no problem. Because the legislation that established the FDA did not specifically say that beef had to be treated in this particular manner, or that the plastic that's used to make capsules must be formulated in this certain way. If this is what the Republicans want, if the legislation doesn't specifically say it, then it can't be. And no regulatory agency was ever created that way, going back to the founding of the country, including the Department of, well, it wasn't the Department of Defense then, it was the Department of War, but you get my point. And it's interesting too. They won't care about this with the Department of Defense, but everything else, anything that has to do with a billionaire not being able to make a buck.
I've told you before that I took part in the first Earth Day.
Yes.
In 1970 at Fairmont Park in Philadelphia. The first Earth Day happened in Philadelphia, here in our state.
Yeah.
And that was concerned. Now, as a teenager, 17-year-old teenager, I was concerned about water and clean air. And of course, all the concerns environmentally have gone past that over the decades and decades and decades since. I mean, now we're looking at, forever chemicals, and we're looking at microplastics.
Yeah.
And microplastics in our microplastics we are inhaling in our lungs every day.
Yep.
Things all go back to fighting like I did and being an advocate and protesting like I did when I was 17 years old in the spring of 1970. And I did catch the last part of your interview where your guest was talking about how great an influence he was at 18 or 19 on Bobby Kennedy.
Yeah,
presidential.
He was 19. He was 19 writing for Senator Kennedy. 19 years old, field organizer, and New York coordinator. Yeah, 19 years old.
And so young people out there, and I hope that you're listening. And if it's only a few, I hope you share Jeff Kennedy's program. Go to, again, as he said earlier, go to YouTube. They're all there. All his interviews for 5 years now, Jeff?
We're in our 5th calendar year. We'll celebrate our 5th anniversary in April. Yeah, but we're in our 5th calendar year.
That's what I thought. And
I want to say something that you brought up, and you are 100% right to bring it up. I just want to emphasize a point. Randall talks about microplastics, and I don't want to ignore everything else that he's saying. Look, I always appreciate Randall's kind words. Nobody needs to pour gravy on me. I'm just a regular dude trying to do what I'm trying to do. I'm working poor. I'm one of those folks that's just $500 away from disaster. And I'm just a regular guy. But I want to emphasize something. So his kind words mean everything to me. They truly, truly do. They're not necessary, but it does mean a lot. It touches me in my heart, and it does. It truly does. I want to say something about microplastics that Randall's 100% right to bring up. Microplastics have been found on every inch of the planet. They're on the peak of Mount Everest. They are at both poles. They are everywhere in the oceans, all over farmland. We are inhaling them. They're in the oceans. They're even being generated by the manufacture of plastic. Sadly enough, they're even being generated by the recycling of plastic, because when the plastic is chopped into bits, it's releasing microplastics. It's in our food. It's in the water supply. It's in microorganisms. Whales, you can see too many videos of whales that will beach themselves because they've starved to death because their stomachs are full of plastic because they think it's food. He's right. Randall's right. And what the billionaires and their chemical companies want is zero regulation to keep you alive. Regulations are not anti-business. They are protections. The greatest regulatory example and the easiest example for people to absorb is seat belts. People were dying by being thrown through the fronts of their cars in crashes. So Congress mandated seat belts. And the seat belts, when they started, were just the waist, right, Randall?
Yeah.
It was the regulatory agency that took it an extra step to say that has to be a 3-point seat belt. Now, as an example, this case that's in front of the Supreme Court now, the regulatory, that would have been the what would that have been, Fran? The National Highway Safety Administration would have done that?
Yes.
I think I have the right one. Randall's telling me I'm right. If he tells me I'm right, then I'm right. They said, no, that's not good enough. Now it needs to be a 3-point shoulder and waist belt. This Supreme Court case would, if the Supreme Court rules against the EPA, it would take away the ability for government to say, no, now it has to be a 3-point seatbelt. Congress would have to pass an entirely new piece of legislation to say that it has to be a 3-point seatbelt. It has to be this big. It has to be mounted here. It has to be made of this fabric. The extra little rear light, Randall, you know what I'm talking about? The extra stoplight that people have like in their rear windows or up on the roof?
Yeah, that was required by the Federal Highway Administration.
But that wasn't separate. It wasn't separate legislation.
No.
The regulatory agency decided this. The same way you have to have blind spot mirrors or anti-lock brakes. This was never separate legislation. This is the function of regulatory agencies as technology and conditions and markets and the proliferation of certain goods and services into the economy changes. And this court case, Randall's completely correct, will strip all of it away. Every single piece of regulation going forward, if the EPA if the Supreme Court rules against the EPA here, will have to be a new piece of legislation. Do you think any regulations, protections for you folks and for your children and for your senior members of your family, you think any regulations will ever come out of a Republican Congress ever about anything? This is why these agencies were created. So go ahead, sir.
Well, you could just throw in another little slide back about the Highway Transportation Safety Administration. They require all trucks to have a low bar below the rear end, and that is for safety.
Yes,
because cars, before they were required to have them, they were sliding underneath. They were going right through the windshield, tearing into the people in the front, in the back. That is safety, my friends out there. That is what good government does.
Hey, Randall, think about this. What about the regulations that require how much rest a driver has to have? That he can only drive so many hours in a day. Think about the massive increase in the proliferation of truck traffic that we have on our interstates now. And if all of that regulation was to be rolled back, drivers can now drive 24, 48, 50 something hours straight, never have to take a break. No. These are regulations that these regulatory agencies have put in place through the explanation of their creation. This is why this agency exists. If all of this has to be separate legislation, it'll never happen. Can you imagine? I mean, Randall lives in a very busy area. George lives very close to Interstate 80. I am 10 minutes off of, not even 10 minutes, really 5 minutes off of Interstate 78, which is nothing but a truck corridor. Can you imagine if these protections are rolled back and now truck drivers can just drive without ever having to stop or rest or sleep or eat or anything? And the owners of these trucking companies now say, oh, well, remember it used to take you, 3 days to get from Port Newark to Cleveland. I now want you to do it in 10 hours. No speed restrictions. Don't rest. Don't stop for a potty break. Don't eat. This is what we're talking about here. The basic functioning of the country. Randall's right. He's right. He doesn't need me to tell him that either. He knows he's right because he is right. This is what we're talking. This is a monumental case. It will be the destruction of government as we know it. And everything that protects you from being ripped off by insurance companies or stock traders or the food killing you to any one of a million other things that I can't even rattle them all off. There's too many of them in my brain right now. It can all disappear. Go ahead, my friend.
I just want to say, get back to number 45. He hasn't just told, the former Speaker of the House Johnson finally agreed with the Senate to pass another continuing resolution. Number 45 was just screaming to every Republican to vote against it. Just like he has screamed for every Republican to vote against any immigration reform, against anything to make our southern border more secure.
Right.
Because if it's happened, if there is immigration reform, for example, which we haven't had in this country, if there is no increased border security, they can do the dog whistle like they have been doing for years and years and years. That the Democrats don't care about an open border. They know that if the border is protected and immigration reforms go through, that will help President Biden be reelected. And their demagogue does not like that.
Right. And they don't want to. They know that they've, to an extent, they've lost the abortion issue. One issue abortion voters have in very measurable numbers disappeared. And they don't want to lose another whole group of voters. One issue voters, the one issue border voters, they don't want to lose them. But the Republicans in the Senate have told the Republicans in the House, this White House is giving us everything we could want on the border because they want the Ukraine aid. Take the deal. It's the best deal we're ever going to get. And still, this Republican House will listen to Trump more than anything else. That's a cult. Because I know it's been a bit cliche. It's been a bit fashionable to describe it all as a cult. Except here's the kind of catch. It is a cult. It's a cult. When the Democrats are going to give the Republicans pretty much everything they want on what they say is one of their number one issues, and you still say no. As God is my witness, if I was the Biden administration, I would offer Republicans $100 billion for the border. Some ridiculous amount of money. 200 billion, 500 billion. Because they'll still say no. Because they honestly don't care what happens at the border. Notice it's only Republican politicians who are telling you that the southern border is open. The Biden administration never said that. As soon as President Biden was elected, Republicans started spewing about the open border. You don't think they listen to that in Central and South America? Of course they do. Oh, well, Senator Cruz said the border's open. Let's go on up. They don't understand the nuance and the politics of it. And don't be mistaken, by the way. Republicans don't care about the border because they want the cheap labor. It's bad for unions. It's bad for wages. It's bad for the middle class. They want those folks here. They want the cheap labor. So they don't want this issue solved on many different levels. Randall's 100% right. They don't want to solve this because they don't want to give what would look like a political victory to the president in an election year. They don't want to solve it because they want all the people who are pissed off about it to continue to vote for them because Republicans say it matters to them. It doesn't matter, but they say it does, and they want those people to continue to come and vote for them. But they also don't want it solved because corporations want cheap labor, like really cheap labor, like below the minimum wage kind of cheap. So Randall's right. They don't want to solve this problem because they quote unquote solved the abortion issue. And now a whole section of their voters have gone home. They claimed victory and went home. They don't want the people who are riled up about the border to go home either. Go ahead, friend. Go ahead, my friend. A couple more minutes before we have to say goodnight.
Yeah, I got to jump over to the film too. But anyway,
I know you cheat and you leave early. I know.
well, that's because I am going to go on his program.
No, I know. I know. Good. I'm teasing you a little. That's all.
Anyway, I need to talk to you privately. I've got a good show. People lined up for a lot of people and a good show dealing with politics. I've got a close friend, a close Democratic friend in a rural Republican county in Ohio that went for Trump 20 points in 2020. Now, and my friend Kevin Fredericks wants to be on that show.
Good.
And so I'll talk to you about that.
Fair enough.
Okay.
All right, you go get them, and you have a great week. I'm glad everything's okay at the house, and we'll talk during the week.
You and Kristen, both of you guys, be cool, and thank you for come back finally and change the.
You can sleep peacefully now. We fixed the graphic.
I know. All right. God bless. Have a good one.
Tell me, and I'll tell you what. I know you're going to catch up and listen to or watch the recording during the week. You let me know what you think.
Well, of course,
I'm super, super excited about how that went. I really am.
All right. Have a good one. I love you, brother.
You do the same. You take care of yourself, and my best to your family. I'm glad the house is okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. George,
Bye-bye.
anything you want to add before we got about 8 minutes left? Anything that you wanted to bring up? Anything that you wanted to talk about? Anything burning a hole in your brain?
No, there are a lot of holes in my brain, but
it's true. Yeah,
a lot of stuff leaked out,
my God.
and I don't have anything burning in my brain.
Between the two of us, I don't think we have a complete gray matter functioning. I would like to say though, since I just remembered, I had talked to George earlier in the day. I had to reset my home internet twice because it went out, and it looks like we made it through. Thank goodness. It can crash now. We're almost done anyway, but I mean, it looks like we made it through. I've talked about this in the program before. There's about 100 different cable TV and internet companies in France. The average French citizen pays about $35 a month for TV and internet. We have cell phone service. There's only really about 3 companies in the United States. Cable companies are local monopolies. You might have 2 or 3 choices, but it's not more than that. So here in the Lehigh Valley, we literally have 2 choices for home internet, 2. So if I was to drop one, I'm only going to the other. And by all accounts from friends, family, Facebook, internet reviews, they both suck. And today, when we had perfectly clear weather, there was some wind. George had asked me about the wind earlier. There's some wind, but certainly nothing dangerous, no gale force winds or anything like that. The internet just dropped twice, just because, hey, why not? And we pay well over $100 for it. Because I do need, I have here in the house just shy of a business grade internet service for what we do here for the program. I have a tremendous amount of bandwidth running through this house, and the number of programs that are running on this computer right now that I'm staring at you at is a bit staggering. So I do need a high amount of service, but the fact that it just kind of works when it feels like, it's the one thing that always kind of gets to me and makes me wonder. That it happens during the summer sometimes. Perfectly clear day, 80, 85 degrees, hasn't rained, not a cloud in the sky, sun's out, perfect, no humidity, perfect day. And the internet will just drop just because, well, I don't know. We feel like it. I don't know. But we did make it through the day. Thankfully, George did not have to hitchhike a ride down or try to or have to take some, ridiculous IT sort of it's a word I'm looking for. Some sort of very comically standard kind of call to bitch about something, and it held up. So that's a good thing. But so the plan is, again, I don't think we're going to be here next week because I think just the sheer number of people, and we're actually seeing it tonight. The folks that are watching and listening live here is lower than normal, measurably normal, or measurably lower than normal. And I have a feeling that the NFL has something to do with that. And that's fine. That's cool. I mean, you happen to enjoy that. Have at it. No complaints. But that will only get worse next week. So rather than fight all that, our, humble little program that doesn't make any money is difficult to fight against a, $40 billion industry, or whatever the NFL is now, 20 billion or something like that dollar industry. It's hard to fight against that. So we everything in my gut is telling me we should not be here with you next week. Watch the NFC and AFC championship games, figure out who's going to be in the Super Bowl, enjoy it, relax, have a beer, have some nachos, have some fun. Then there is a week in between where the NFL does not play at all. So next week is the 28th. The championship games are the 28th. The Sunday, the 4th, there is no NFL. And then the 11th is the Super Bowl. So my plan is to not be here next week, the 28th, come back on February 4th, away from you again on the 11th, and then back on the 18th. I realize it's very choppy, but it's just the reality of it. I can tell that the number of people that are watching and listening is measurably lower, and it is in all likelihood due to the NFL games. And that's fine. It's what people like. It's not my cup of tea, but it's what people like, and it's understandable. But that's the plan. I also want to say that Pennsylvania has its own insurrectionist member of the House of Representatives, Scott Perry, in the 10th congressional district. He helped Trump plan the January 6th insurrection, voted to decertify the election. He helped Trump find Jeffrey Clark, that Trump was going to make attorney general so that he could nullify the election. Interestingly enough, Mr. Perry was reelected in the 2020 election, but somehow that election wasn't rigged, but the presidential one was. There are 8 Democrats running in a primary to unseat Mr. Perry. I have invited as many of them as I can contact to come on the program. They can come together. They can come separately. I don't care. But if there's any congressperson in the country, perhaps compared to either Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, Louis Gohmert, Gosar in Arizona. There's a handful of them, Matt Gaetz. There's a handful of them that, boy, if Democrats can't unseat these, then we should probably give up and go home. Scott Perry's one of them. So the folks who are trying to unseat him, I've invited as many of them as I can contact to come on the program. I'm hoping that they will be coming in subsequent weeks. If they choose to come together and they want to have a debate in a forum, that would be great. If they want to come separately, we'll take that too. So that's what's coming up on the program in the next couple of months. Not here next week, back on the 4th, away for Super Bowl, back on the 18th. We're hoping it's going to be candidate season coming up real soon, with primaries coming and of course candidates going into the general. It is a presidential election year. It is the biggest election of our memory, not just because that's a cool thing to say, but because it is. Democracy's on the ballot. It's either going to be one in the next election, series of next elections, or it'll be the last one we ever have in this country. That's the choice. 9 p.m. That's the end of us for now. For everyone at hot101.net, DJ Lex, DJ Earl, everybody at 101, for everybody at TCP, for April Riddick, for George and Lynn Dare, and for Kristen, Daisy the dog, and Guy the cat. I am Jeff Kennedy. We've done all the damage we can do for 1 week. Please catch, if you missed any of the program, youtube.com, that other side of information. We return in 2 weeks. Take care of yourselves and each other.